He wouldn't pay $10. Now, the town is paying in blood. Texas Cut, full-length Western thriller audiobook. Chapter 1. Keep your head up, Eldridge Sample told the bay horse. The animal flicked an ear and snorted a cloud of alkali dust from its nostrils. The hooves struck the packed earth with a rhythmic thud, carrying them past the town limits sign. The painted wood declared the place Ocotillo. Ocotillo held a strange kind of wealth. Fresh whitewash blinded the eye in the noon sun, coating the false fronts of the mercantile and the assayer's office. Plate glass filled the windows, reflecting the harsh light. Brass caps topped the hitching posts along the main thoroughfare. A bank constructed of cut stone anchored the main intersection, projecting an image of absolute permanence. Cattle money built the structures. Cattle money paid the freight. The citizens told a contrary story. A man carrying a sack of flour from the general store kept his chin tucked to his chest. He fixed his eyes on his boots and hurried his step. Two cowhands stepped off the boardwalk to let a single rider pass, surrendering the prime space without a fight. The cowhands removed their hats. The rider ignored the gesture. A woman sweeping her front porch grabbed her young boy by the collar. She dragged him behind a heavy oak door as Eldridge rode past. She threw the deadbolt. The lock engaged with a loud click. Silence blanketed the street, thick and suffocating. Fear ruled Ocatillo. Eldridge steered the bay toward the Silver Star Saloon. The building dominated the block, standing 2 stories tall. Twin balconies extended over the street, shading the dirt below. He pulled the horse to a halt. He looped the reins around a wrought iron ring. He loosened the cinch, giving the horse room to breathe. He patted the dust from his canvas coat. He checked the colt on his hip, a habit born of long roads and bad company. He stepped onto the boardwalk. The wood felt solid under his heels. He pushed the batwing doors. They swung inward on silent hinges. The Silver Star offered cool air and the scent of expensive cigars. Cut glass chandeliers hung from a stamped tin ceiling, catching the light from the front windows. A mahogany bar ran the length of the left wall, polished to a mirror finish. A genuine mirror backed the counter, reflecting the vast room and the rows of intact bottles. 3 men sat in the back corner, playing faro. They kept their voices down to a whisper. They held their cards close to their vests. They cast nervous glances toward the street. Eldridge walked to the bar. He placed his hands flat on the cool wood. A bartender emerged from the back room. He wore a crisp white shirt, black armbands, and a stiff collar. He possessed the bulk of a retired bare-knuckle fighter, but his eyes darted around the room like a cornered rabbit. "What can I pour you?" the bartender asked. "Beer," Eldridge said, "and a plate of whatever the cook has ready." "Beer is a dime. Food is 50 cents. Steak and beans today." "Pour the beer," Eldridge said. He pulled a silver dollar from his vest pocket. He set it on the mahogany. "Keep the change. Tell me about the bathhouse." "Down the street. Next to the livery." The bartender took the coin. He pulled a glass mug from a shelf. He pulled the tap on a wooden keg. Amber liquid filled the glass, topping off with a thick head of foam. He set the mug in front of Eldridge. He turned and retreated through the swinging doors to the kitchen. Eldridge took a long drink. The beer tasted cold, biting the dust out of his throat. He set the mug down. He enjoyed the chill in the glass. He let the silence of the room wash over him. The bartender returned, carrying a tin plate. A thick cut of beef sizzled alongside a mound of red beans. He set the plate on the bar. He handed Eldridge a knife and a fork. Eldridge cut a piece of the steak. He chewed. The meat offered good flavor, seasoned with salt and pepper. The beans carried the sting of jalapeno. "Quiet town," Eldridge said. He used the fork to point at the empty room. "We prefer peace," the bartender said. He picked up a rag. He started wiping an invisible spot on the bar. He refused to meet Eldridge's gaze. "Men walking with their heads down means they expect a blow," Eldridge said. He took another bite of steak. "Who does the hitting around here?" The bartender stopped wiping. He looked at Eldridge. He evaluated the canvas coat, the worn hat, the low-slung gun belt. "You want advice, stranger?" the bartender asked. "I bought a beer. Advice comes free. Eat the steak. Take your bath. Ride out." Ocotillo lacks a sense of humor for questions. Eldridge smiled. He picked up the mug. "I ask a lot of questions. Keeps me entertained." The batwing doors slapped open. The harsh light of the street spilled into the room, framing a man built from raw edge and bad attitude. He wore a knee-length canvas duster. Heavy silver spurs gouged the floorboards with every step. A thick mustache covered his upper lip. His mouth held a permanent sneer. He carried the confidence of a man who owned the air he breathed. The scent of cheap bay rum and horse sweat preceded him. He stopped inside the door. He surveyed the room. He looked at the three faro players. The players put their cards face down on the table. They folded their hands in their laps. They stared at the green felt, refusing to make eye contact. The man turned his gaze to the bar. He dismissed Eldridge with a glance. He walked up to the counter, taking the spot 2 feet away from the drifter. "Higgins," the man said. The bartender threw the rag under the counter. He stood at attention. The nervous rabbit energy multiplied. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Afternoon, Dutch," Higgins said. "You know the day, Higgins?" Dutch asked. He leaned an elbow on the bar. He tapped his fingers on the wood. The knuckles bore thick white scars. "It is collection day," Higgins said. "It is collection day," Dutch agreed. "Mr. Vasquez expects the accounts balanced. He expects a full measure." Dutch reached across the bar. He grabbed a bottle of rye whiskey by the neck. He pulled a clean glass toward him. He poured a generous measure. He drank it in one swallow. He offered no payment. Higgins asked for none. Higgins reached under the bar. He brought out a thick manila envelope. The paper bulged in the middle. He slid it across the mahogany. Dutch set the empty glass down. He took the envelope. He ripped the top flap open. He looked inside. He pulled out a stack of greenbacks and gold coins. He set the money on the bar. He started counting. He flipped the bills with a wet thumb. Eldridge watched. He took another sip of beer. He cut another piece of steak. He ate while a town merchant handed over the profits of his labor to a thug. Dutch separated the bills into 2 piles. He stacked the gold coins into neat columns. He finished the count. He looked at Higgins. His eyes held the warmth of a frozen pond. "You came up short last week, Higgins," Dutch said. "I had a bad week," Higgins said. His voice cracked. "The cattle drive bypassed us. Went to the railhead up north. The saloon stayed empty." "Mr. Vasquez provides a service," Dutch said. "He guarantees this establishment remains free from trouble. He guarantees your windows remain whole. He guarantees your breathing continues uninterrupted. A service requires payment." "I made it up," Higgins said. He pointed to the pile of money. "I added the $10 I owed. Count it again." Dutch ignored the request. He swept the money back into the envelope. He folded the top over. He shoved the package into the deep pocket of his duster. "Mr. Vasquez appreciates your dedication to the schedule," Dutch said. Dutch turned. He looked at Eldridge. He registered the worn clothes, the dust, the peacemaker. He saw a man who failed to show the proper respect. He saw a man eating steak while the rest of the room bowed its head. "You staring at something, cowboy?" Dutch asked. He rested his hand near the butt of his revolver. Eldridge met the man's eyes. They held the empty, flat challenge of a bully used to people looking away. Eldridge chewed his meat. He swallowed. He set his fork on the tin plate. "I admire a good collection trick," Eldridge said. "Saves you the trouble of working for a living." Chapter 2. "You possess a loud voice for a man eating another man's beef," Dutch said. Eldridge Sample cut a piece of steak. He slid the meat through the jalapeno bean juice. He lifted the fork, placed the food in his mouth, and chewed. He swallowed the bite. He set the fork down. The tines clinked against the tin plate. "I paid 50 cents for the meal," Eldridge said. "The commentary comes free." Dutch pivoted. He turned his back on Higgins. He left the thick envelope of extorted cash sitting on the mahogany bar. He hooked his thumbs into his gun belt. He closed the distance between them. He invaded Eldridge's space. The scent of bay rum and stale cigar smoke rolled off his canvas duster. "Commentary carries a price tag in Ocotillo," Dutch said. "Everything carries a price tag. Mr. Vasquez insists on a balanced ledger." Eldridge picked up his glass mug. He studied the amber liquid inside. He took a sip. He appreciated the cold bite of the brew against his throat. "I settle my own ledgers," Eldridge said. "I owe the bartender for the beer. I owe nobody else a dime." Dutch leaned an elbow on the bar. He crowded Eldridge. He wanted to force a flinch. He wanted the stranger to lean away. Eldridge held his ground. Eldridge continued to inspect his beer glass. "You misinterpret the situation, cowboy," Dutch said. "Mr. Vasquez operates a benevolent enterprise. He provides a service to the community. He provides a service to travelers. He guarantees safe passage." "Safe passage from what?" Eldridge asked. "From the hazards of the frontier," Dutch said. He gestured toward the batwing doors and the glaring street beyond. "The trail out of town presents numerous dangers. Renegades roam the ridges. Coyotes spook the horses. A man riding alone might suffer an ambush. He might find his saddlebags emptied and his throat cut. He might vanish into the scrub brush." "I keep a sharp eye out for coyotes," Eldridge said. Dutch smirked. The thick mustache twitched. He bared a row of yellow teeth. "A sharp eye fails to stop a bullet in the back," Dutch said. "A sharp eye provides zero comfort when a dozen men surround your camp. Mr. Vasquez offers an alternative. He offers an insurance policy. A visitor's tax. You pay the tax, you ride out unmolested. You enjoy the scenery. Your horse keeps its shoes." Eldridge used a piece of bread to mop up the remaining bean juice. He ate the bread. He pushed the empty tin plate away. He turned his head. He met Dutch's gaze. Dutch possessed flat, dead eyes. They resembled pieces of wet slate. They contained zero empathy. They processed the world as a series of targets and victims. "How much does Mr. Vasquez charge for this scenery?" Eldridge asked. $10, Dutch said. "Gold or silver? We reject paper currency." $10 buys a prime steer, Eldridge said. $10 buys a week in a clean hotel in Fort Worth. $10 buys your life in Ocatillo, Dutch countered. The three faro players at the back table sat frozen. They stared at the green felt. They refused to look up. Higgins stood rigid near the cash register. A drop of sweat rolled down the bartender's temple. The entire saloon waited for the explosion. Eldridge picked up the mug. He drained the rest of the beer. He set the heavy glass down. The thud echoed against the stamped tin ceiling. "I refuse the policy," Eldridge said. Dutch dropped his elbows from the bar. He straightened his spine. He puffed out his chest. The duster fell open, revealing the staghorn grips of a heavy revolver. "I presented a requirement, no request," Dutch said. "You pay the toll, or you face the consequences." "I do not pay for air," Eldridge said. Eldridge wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He grabbed his hat from the counter. He settled the felt brim low over his forehead. He pivoted away from the bar. He took a step toward the doors. Dutch stepped into his path. Dutch blocked the exit. "You empty your pockets right now," Dutch demanded. "You hand over the $10. Or I beat you until you bleed and I take your entire roll." Eldridge stopped. He stood 2 feet from the enforcer. He relaxed his shoulders. He let his arms hang loose. He aligned his right hand near the walnut grip of the Colt Peacemaker. "You talk a good game," Eldridge said. "You extort merchants. You intimidate card players. You collect envelopes filled with other men's sweat." "I enforce the law of the town," Dutch snarled. "You enforce the greed of Hector Vasquez," Eldridge corrected. "But right now, you face a different problem. You face a man who calculates the math of a gunfight." Dutch glared at him. The veins in Dutch's neck bulged against his collar. "I can draw and put 2 rounds in your belly before your brain registers the movement," Eldridge stated. "Your hand hovers 3 inches from your gun. My hand touches the leather. I hold the advantage. You know the truth of it." Dutch stared at Eldridge's hand. He read the muscle tension. He saw the absolute certainty in the drifter's posture. He knew the speed required to win the draw, and he recognized a man who possessed that speed. "Mr. Vasquez dislikes gunplay inside the Silver Star," Dutch said. "He searched for a face-saving exit. He hates replacing the mirror glass. I prefer to kill you in the street." "The street offers plenty of room," Eldridge said. "But right now, you block my path to the door. Move." Dutch hesitated. His pride warred with his survival instinct. He heard Higgins breathing behind the bar. He knew the faro players watched his every move. He needed to maintain his reputation. Eldridge took a half-step forward. He crowded Dutch. He forced the issue. Dutch shifted his weight. He stepped to the side. He yielded the right of way. Eldridge walked past him. He kept his eyes forward. He pushed the batwing doors open. The hinges squeaked. He stepped out onto the sun-baked boardwalk. Inside the saloon, Dutch spun around. He slammed his fist onto the mahogany counter. The impact rattled the empty beer mug and the tin plate. "Higgins!" Dutch roared. The bartender jumped. "Yes, Dutch." "Send a boy to the livery. Send a boy to the edge of town. Tell the men to saddle their horses. Tell them a drifter riding a bay horse declined the visitor's tax." Dutch grabbed the thick envelope of extorted cash. He shoved the money deep into his pocket. He turned a furious glare on the faro players. "Play your damn cards," Dutch barked. The players scrambled to shuffle the deck. Outside, the heat hit Eldridge. He stepped down into the dirt street. He walked to the hitching ring. He untied the leather reins. He ran a hand down the bay horse's neck. "Change of plans," Eldridge told the horse. "We skip the bathhouse. This town charges too much for the soap." He led the horse down the street. He headed toward the livery stable. He needed to buy grain. He needed to secure his supplies. He recognized he bought himself an enemy, but he accepted the cost. He preferred a fight to a shakedown. He kept his right hand free, his eyes scanning the rooftops and the alleyways, preparing for the consequences of breathing free air. Chapter 3. The bank holds the paper, Miss Trent, Dutch said. But Mr. Vasquez holds the bank. The distinction matters. The alley behind the Ocotillo schoolhouse smelled of sun-baked brick and sour garbage. The shadows offered zero relief from the heat. Abigail Trent stood with her back pressed flat against the clapboard siding of the building. She clutched a slate chalkboard to her chest like a shield of armor. Her dress, a faded blue cotton print, showed chalk dust at the hem. She held her chin high, refusing to break eye contact with the man blocking her exit. "My father owed the money," Abigail said. Her voice carried the practiced, firm tone of a woman used to commanding a room full of rowdy children. "My father died 3 months ago. The debt died with him." Dutch leaned a thick forearm against the wall, trapping her in the narrow space between his body and the school. He chewed on a wooden matchstick. "Debts possess a long lifespan in this town," Dutch said. "They outlive the debtor. They pass down to the blood. Mr. Vasquez runs a business, no charity ward. Elias Trent borrowed $500 to buy mining equipment. He dug a dry hole. He caught the fever. He died. The $500 remains outstanding. I hold a position here," Abigail said. "I teach the children. The town council pays me a wage. I will pay Mr. Vasquez $10 a month." Dutch laughed. The sound echoed off the bricks, harsh and scraping. He shifted his weight, closing the gap. The heavy silver spurs on his boots clanked. $10 a month," Dutch repeated. 50 months. Over 4 years. You factor in the interest, Miss Trent. You die of old age before you scratch the principal. Mr. Vasquez requires a faster return on his investment. I possess nothing else to give. You underestimate your assets, Dutch said. He reached out with his free hand. He traced a thick, calloused finger down the edge of her collar. Abigail slapped his hand away. The chalkboard slipped, clattering against the dirt. "Do not touch me," she ordered. Dutch dropped the matchstick from his teeth. The false politeness vanished. His face darkened, the humiliation from the Silver Star Saloon bleeding into his current temper. He grabbed her right wrist. He squeezed. He pinned her arm to the wall. "I offer you a career change," Dutch snarled. "The Silver Star needs fresh talent. Higgins runs the bar, but the upstairs rooms require a different kind of management. You work the rooms. You entertain the drovers. We clear your father's ledger in 6 months." "I prefer to burn in hell," Abigail said. She twisted her arm, fighting his grip. "You burn right here in Ocotillo," Dutch said. He leaned his face close to hers. The smell of bay rum and stale liquor filled the narrow gap. "You show up tonight. 8 o'clock. You wear something red. You fail to appear. I return tomorrow. I drag you out of this schoolhouse by your hair in front of your pupils." 50 yards down the alley, Eldridge Sample led the bay horse toward the rear entrance of the livery stable. He heard the exchange. The acoustics of the brick walls funneled the words straight to him. He stopped. He studied the layout. A large, galvanized iron water trough sat near the livery doors, coated in a thick layer of green algae. A wooden pitchfork leaned against a stack of moldy hay bales right next to the trough. The tool featured a long, heavy ash handle, smooth from years of use. Eldridge looped the leather reins around a hitching post. He patted the bay's neck. He walked down the alley. His boots made minimal noise in the soft dirt. He stopped at the hay bales. He picked up the pitchfork. He tested the weight. He reversed his grip, pointing the sharp iron tines at the ground, holding the thick ash pole across his body like a staff. He moved forward. He stopped 10 feet behind Dutch. Dutch maintained his grip on Abigail's wrist. He pressed his body closer to hers, using his bulk to intimidate. 8 o'clock, Dutch demanded. Say you understand. You drop things, Dutch, Eldridge said. Dutch froze. The muscles in his neck jumped. He recognized the voice. He released Abigail's wrist. He turned his head, looking over his shoulder. He saw the drifter. He saw the pitchfork. Dutch sneered. He let his hand drop toward the heavy revolver holstered on his hip. You push your luck, cowboy, Dutch said. You survived the saloon because I let you walk. You follow me into an alley with farm tools, you commit suicide. You fight women in alleys, Eldridge said. You leave a wide opening. Dutch pivoted. He cleared the leather. The long barrel of his revolver came up. Eldridge moved faster. He stepped in, swinging the heavy ash handle of the pitchfork in a low, vicious arc. The solid wood connected with the back of Dutch's knees. Crack. The impact collapsed Dutch's legs. The enforcer grunted, his center of gravity dropping instantly. The gunshot fired wide, a deafening blast that punched a hole through the roof of the schoolhouse. Dutch hit the dirt on his knees. Eldridge didn't pause. He reversed his swing. He drove the butt end of the pitchfork handle straight into Dutch's chest. The blow struck dead center on the sternum, driving the air from Dutch's lungs with a wet, hollow thump. Dutch dropped the revolver. He gagged, fighting for oxygen. Eldridge grabbed the front of Dutch's canvas duster. He hauled the big man up, turned him, and shoved him hard toward the livery perimeter. Dutch stumbled backward, his spurs tangling. He hit the rim of the galvanized water trough. He flipped over the edge, crashing into the stagnant water. Water splashed high, raining down on the dirt. The green algae swallowed him. Dutch broke the surface. He sputtered, choking on the foul water. He thrashed in the confined space of the metal tank, his duster acting like a sea anchor dragging him down. He clawed at the rim, gasping, wiping thick slime from his eyes. Eldridge walked over to the trough. He stood, looking down at the enforcer. He rested the pitchfork handle on the iron rim, right next to Dutch's desperate fingers. The visitor's tax just expired, Eldridge said. Dutch coughed up water. He glared at Eldridge, his face red with rage and humiliation. He reached for the rim again. Eldridge tapped the man's knuckles with the wood. Dutch pulled his hands back. Stay in the bath, Eldridge advised. You smell like a bad decision. Eldridge turned his back on the trough. He walked over to Abigail Trent. She remained against the wall. She rubbed her reddened wrist. She looked at the man sputtering in the algae, then looked at the drifter in the dust-coated canvas coat. She stooped and picked up her chalkboard. You ruined his coat, Abigail said. He ruined my appetite, Eldridge replied. Eldridge picked up Dutch's fallen revolver from the dirt. He checked the cylinder, emptied the remaining cartridges into his palm, and tossed the empty weapon onto the roof of the schoolhouse. It clattered against the shingles and stuck in the rain gutter. He pocketed the brass shells. He promised to return, Abigail said. Her voice held a tremor now, the aftermath of the adrenaline leaving her system. He works for Hector Vasquez. He enforces the rules. You merely delayed the collection. I bought you a window, Eldridge said. A window to do what? Flee. I hold a contract here. I teach the children. The children take a holiday, Eldridge said. You go home. You pull the shades. You slide the deadbolt. Locking a door stops a thief. It fails to stop a man who owns the town. It slows him down, Eldridge said. It makes him break wood. Breaking wood makes noise. Noise draws eyes. Vasquez likes things quiet. He likes envelopes pushed across bars, not screams in alleys. Abigail studied his face. She searched for a motive. She saw flat blue eyes that offered no comfort, only geometry. You interrupted him, she said. You humiliated him twice in one afternoon. He will hunt you. Let him hunt, Eldridge said. He tossed the pitchfork back onto the haystack. He walked toward the bay horse tied at the post. You ride out? Abigail asked, taking a step away from the wall. I secure a stall, Eldridge said. I buy grain. Then I see about a bathhouse that charges a fair price for soap. They will ambush you on the road. They control the trails out of Ocotillo. I check my corners, Eldridge said. He untied the bay. He looked back at her. She stood straight, gripping the chalkboard, a solitary figure holding onto her dignity in a town designed to strip it away. Lock the door, Miss Trent, Eldridge repeated. He led the horse into the dim interior of the livery stable, leaving Abigail in the alley with the echo of the gunshot and the sound of a very angry man trying to climb out of a horse trough. Chapter 4. You purchased a plot in the local cemetery, the liveryman said. The man stood inside the dim barn, leaning heavily on a pitchfork. He possessed a bad leg and a face mapped with broken veins. He watched Eldridge Sample lead the bay horse into the center aisle. He looked past Eldridge, checking the alley for trailing trouble. I purchased 30 pounds of oats, Eldridge said. He dropped a silver dollar onto an empty barrel head. The coin spun, settling with a metallic ring. And a stall for the night. Dutch holds a long memory, the liveryman said. He ignored the coin. He owns half the men in this town. Hector Vasquez owns the other half. You threw their top enforcer into a horse trough. They will skin you for the insult. Eldridge unbuckled the saddle girth. He hauled the heavy leather rig off the bay's back. He draped it over the wooden partition of an empty stall. Dutch requires a towel, zero vengeance, Eldridge said. He grabbed a curry comb from a hook. He began working the dust out of the bay's coat. The horse sighed, leaning into the pressure. A man with wet boots makes a poor fighter. You misread the politics, the liveryman insisted. He hobbled closer. Dutch commands respect through fear. You stripped the fear away. In front of the school teacher. He has to kill you to get it back. Let him try in the morning, Eldridge said. Right now, I require grain for the animal. The liveryman stared at the drifter. He shook his head, a slow movement of absolute disbelief. He picked up the silver dollar. He limped to the back room and returned carrying a canvas sack. He dropped it by the stall door. 30 pounds, the man said. I am locking the double doors tonight. You want your horse tomorrow, you knock 3 times. My name is Cobb. Eldridge. I suggest you ride out tonight, Eldridge. Under the moon. Take the south trail. It runs flat. I sleep in a bed tonight, Eldridge said. I ride north tomorrow. The high country offers cooler air. Eldridge finished brushing the horse. He poured a measure of oats into the feed box. He patted the bay's neck, grabbed his saddlebags, and walked out of the barn. The sun sat on the edge of the western horizon, casting long, sharp shadows down the main street of Ocotillo. The heat remained trapped between the false front buildings, thick and still. The town watched him. Men stood in clusters on the boardwalks. They stopped their conversations. They tracked his movement. 2 cowhands leaning against the posts of the assayer's office tracked him with flat, hostile eyes. A man sitting on a crate outside the barber shop spat a stream of dark tobacco juice into the dirt as Eldridge passed. Eldridge kept his pace even. He let his right hand hang loose, brushing the canvas of his coat near the Colt peacemaker. He offered no challenge, but he presented zero weakness. He walked the center line of the street, avoiding the confined spaces of the wooden walks. He reached the Ocotillo house. It stood 2 stories high, boasting a fresh coat of yellow paint and a wraparound porch. He pushed through the etched glass doors. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and stale cigar smoke. A desk clerk with a green visor stood behind a mahogany counter. The clerk possessed the nervous energy of a trapped bird. "A room," Eldridge said. He dropped $1 on the register book. "Facing the street." The clerk looked at the coin. He looked at Eldridge. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing above his stiff collar. "We stand full," the clerk said. His voice cracked. Eldridge reached out. He gripped the heavy brass bell sitting on the counter. He moved it 2 inches to the left. The scrape of metal on wood sounded loud in the quiet room. "The key box behind your head holds 10 keys," Eldridge observed. "I count 2 missing. You have 8 empty rooms." "Mr. Vasquez prefers," the clerk started. "I prefer room 3, Eldridge interrupted. "It sits right above the awning. Good sightlines." Eldridge tapped the silver dollar. The clerk flinched. He turned, grabbed a brass key from the cubby marked with a 3, and slid it across the polished wood. He pulled the dollar toward his vest. "Top of the stairs," the clerk whispered. "First door on the right." Eldridge took the key. He climbed the staircase. The steps groaned under his boots. Room 3 offered a brass bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the street. Eldridge locked the door. He took the solitary wooden chair from the corner and wedged the backrest under the brass doorknob. He kicked the chair legs tight against the floorboards. He moved to the window. He pulled the lace curtain aside 1 inch. The street below prepared for night. The lamps inside the Silver Star Saloon flared to life. Across the dirt road, 2 men leaned against the hitching rail. They stared directly up at room 3. One of them pulled a match, struck it on his boot heel, and lit a cigarette. The flame illuminated a hard face and a low-slung gun belt. Vasquez's men. They held the watch. Eldridge let the curtain drop. He unbuckled his gun belt and draped it over the bedpost. He pulled the Colt from the leather. He checked the cylinder, confirming 5 loaded chambers. He set the heavy revolver on the nightstand, inches from the pillow. He removed his boots. He kept his clothes on. He lay flat on the mattress, resting his hands behind his head. He thought about the school teacher, Abigail Trent. She possessed a straight spine and a heavy debt. Dutch presented a severe problem for her. But Ocatillo contained 100 problems for 100 different people, and Eldridge Sample held a firm policy against carrying other people's luggage. "Not my town," Eldridge told the ceiling. "Not my ledger." He closed his eyes. He listened to the muffled piano music drifting up from the saloon down the block. He listened for footsteps in the hall. He drifted into a shallow, tactical sleep. Dawn arrived with a gray, muted light. The air held a brief, deceptive chill. Eldridge rose. He splashed cold water from the basin onto his face. He pulled his boots on, strapped his gun belt around his waist, and removed the chair from the door. He walked downstairs. The lobby sat empty. The clerk slept on a cot in the back room. Eldridge stepped out onto the porch. The morning silence felt heavy, pregnant with unspent violence. The 2 men from the night watch remained across the street. They pushed off the hitching rail when Eldridge appeared. They dropped their cigarette butts. They adjusted their hats. They did not cross the street. They simply watched. Eldridge walked to the livery. He knocked 3 times on the double doors. Cobb opened the latch. The liveryman looked exhausted. He held a shotgun in his left hand. "You lived," Cobb said. "I sleep light," Eldridge replied. He walked to the stall. He threw the blanket over the bay's back. He hoisted the saddle, securing the cinch with tight expert pulls. He tied the sack of oats behind the cantle. He led the horse into the yard. "They wait for you," Cobb warned. "The whole crew." "They wait for a show," Eldridge said. "I plan to disappoint them." He swung into the saddle. He rode out of the livery yard, turning the horse north, up the center of the main street. The town of Ocotillo turned out for the departure. Shopkeepers stood in their doorways. Cowhands sat on barrels. They lined the route like spectators at a parade. Eldridge kept his hands visible, resting on the saddle horn. He scanned the rooftops and the alleys. He looked for rifle barrels. He found none. He approached the Silver Star Saloon. A man stood on the second-story balcony. He wore a tailored gray suit and a pristine white shirt. Silver conchos decorated his hatband. He possessed a neat, trimmed beard and the absolute stillness of a predator observing its territory. Hector Vasquez. Vasquez held a demi-tasse cup of coffee. He looked down at Eldridge. He offered 0 expression. No anger. No challenge. Just cold, calculating assessment. Eldridge met his gaze. Eldridge lifted his right hand. He touched the brim of his dusty hat with 2 fingers. A deliberate, mocking salute. Vasquez took a sip of his coffee. He did not return the gesture. Eldridge rode past the saloon. The men lining the street watched him go. A few took half steps off the boardwalk, their hands twitching near their holsters. Nobody drew. Nobody shouted. Eldridge reached the edge of town. The buildings gave way to open scrub and the rising slope of the northern trail. The bay horse picked up the pace, eager to stretch its legs. The tension broke the moment the town limits sign receded behind them. The air felt cleaner. The smell of sage replaced the smell of fear and cheap lumber. Eldridge let out a long breath. He relaxed his shoulders. He had walked into the trap, insulted the trapper, and walked out without burning powder. It stood as a good piece of business. He guided the horse up the rocky incline, putting distance between himself and the corruption of the valley. He focused on the high country ahead. He considered the cold streams and the empty camps waiting in the mountains. He settled into the saddle, secure in the knowledge that he had left Ocatillo and its troubles entirely behind him. Chapter 5. 10 miles of alkali dust separated Eldridge Sample from the baked lumber of Ocotillo. The flat scrub yielded to rising elevation. The terrain folded into a labyrinth of red rock and narrow canyons. Heat baked the stone walls, reflecting the sun's malice onto the rider and animal traversing the space. The air tasted of fired clay and dry sage. The bay horse maintained a steady walking rhythm, its iron shoes striking a consistent beat against the hardpan. Eldridge allowed his body to sway with the saddle. He rested his right hand near his thigh. He kept his posture relaxed, but his eyes active. He studied the ridge lines. He analyzed the shadows pooling in the crevices. He cataloged every displaced stone and broken branch. Hector Vasquez ran a tight operation in the valley. Vasquez demanded absolute obedience from the merchants and the cowhands. Dutch provided the blunt muscle, breaking fingers and crushing spirits. A man skipping the visitor's tax created a bad example. Vasquez required an example made of the offender to maintain his extortion racket. Eldridge anticipated a pursuit. He checked his back trail at regular intervals. The trail remained empty. 0 dust clouds marked the southern horizon. 0 riders appeared on the skyline. The absence of pursuit indicated a trap. A trap required a precise choke point. Ambushers prefer controlled environments. The upcoming trail pinched into a dry ravine. Steep walls of limestone rose on both sides, creating a bottleneck. A dried riverbed formed the floor, littered with bleached driftwood and smooth river stones. The geography offered 0 alternate routes. It offered 0 cover. It presented a perfect kill zone. Eldridge considered the geometry of an ambush. The high ground provides tactical supremacy. The narrow floor provides confinement. He noted the sun position in the sky. Mid-morning light cast a harsh glare on the eastern ridge, blinding anyone looking in that direction. The light threw the western ridge into deep shadow. He expected the attack from the shaded western ridge. Ambushers hide in shadows. Eldridge guided the bay into the ravine. He loosened the leather strap, securing the Springfield carbine in its scabbard. He kept his right hand near the rifle stock. He listened to the canyon acoustics, separating the wind noise from the sounds of human presence. A clatter broke the silence. Metal striking flint. The sound originated from the upper left ridge. The shaded side. Someone had kicked a loose rock. Eldridge shifted his weight. He gripped the Springfield stock. A rifle cracked. A plume of white smoke erupted from the shadow. Lead tore through the crown of Eldridge's hat. The kinetic impact wrenched his neck. The felt hat flew from his head, landing in the dirt. Eldridge bailed. He kicked his boots clear of the stirrups. He hauled the Springfield from the scabbard. He threw his body off the right side of the moving horse. He hit the riverbed gravel with a grunt of pain. He executed a shoulder roll, dissipating the momentum of the fall. He positioned himself behind a wedge of fallen limestone. The bay horse panicked. It bolted down the trail, escaping the canyon. Gunfire erupted from the rim in a continuous roar. 4 distinct rifles hammered the canyon floor. Bullets chipped the limestone wedge. Rock dust rained upon Eldridge's canvas coat. Lead fragments bit into the dry earth. "You hit him," a voice echoed from the heights. "I took his head off," a second voice yelled. "I saw the hat fly." "Maintain the volley," a third voice commanded. Vasquez ordered a sieve. "Turn him into a sieve." Amateurs. They bunched their positions. They bragged. They assumed victory before inspecting the corpse. Professional killers confirmed the kill before celebrating. Eldridge flipped the Springfield breech block open. His thumb shoved a heavy brass cartridge into the chamber. He snapped the block shut. He engaged the hammer. The mechanical clicks felt familiar and comforting in his hands. He regulated his breathing. A racing heart ruins marksmanship. He forced a steady pulse. He peered around the jagged edge of his rock cover. 3 men stood silhouetted against the sky on the left ridge. A 4th man crouched behind a dead cedar trunk on the right ridge. The man on the right presented a clear, isolated target. He knelt in profile, exposing his chest. Eldridge raised the heavy rifle. He nestled the iron sights against the center of the crouched man's chest. He exhaled a half-breath, steadying the barrel. He squeezed the trigger. Boom! The .45 to 70 slug folded the man in half. The impact lifted him off his feet. He pitched over the edge, crashing through the brittle cedar branches. He tumbled down the sheer rock face. He struck the canyon floor in a cloud of red dust. He lay motionless. The 3 men on the left ridge ceased their fire. Silence descended for a brief heartbeat. "Jesus," one screamed. Ramon took a hit. "He ain't dead," the lead shooter yelled. "Resume fire. Pin the bastard." A fresh volley of lead hammered Eldridge's rock. Splinters of stone sliced through the air. Eldridge ejected the spent brass casing. The hot metal burned a mark into the dirt. He chambered a fresh round. He altered his position. He crab-walked to the opposite side of the limestone slab. He awaited a lull in the shooting. A rifle clicked empty on the ridge. "Reloading," the shooter announced. A fatal mistake in a gunfight. Eldridge exited his cover. He leveled the Springfield. He acquired a target. A man wearing a brown leather vest stood exposed, fumbling with a cardboard ammunition box. Eldridge fired. The heavy bullet struck the man's right shoulder. The kinetic shock spun him like a child's top. He screamed, a high piercing sound. His rifle clattered against the stone. He staggered a step in retreat, his boots finding zero purchase on the loose shale. He vanished over the far side of the ridge. A heavy thud resonated in the following seconds. Panic infected the remaining ambushers. Their numerical advantage evaporated. "Ride," the third voice shrieked. "Flee this place." Scrambling boots created a frantic rhythm on the rocks. Horses whinnied in distress. Hooves struck solid stone. The two surviving gunmen prioritized flight over a prolonged engagement. The high country swallowed the receding hoofbeats. Eldridge maintained his position for 2 full minutes. He listened to the returning silence. The wind resumed its hiss through the brush. He broke the breech open, extracted the spent casing, and loaded a live cartridge. He preferred a loaded weapon during an inspection. He stepped into the open riverbed. He walked the trail. He found his horse grazing 100 yards down the path. The bay cropped a patch of yellow grass. The animal ignored the echoes of violence. Eldridge patted the horse's neck. "Good boy. You held your ground." Eldridge returned to the ambush site. He located his hat in the dirt. He retrieved it. He pushed 2 fingers through the bullet hole. The lead projectile had pierced the felt crown, missing his skull by a fraction of an inch. The entry hole displayed neat edges. The exit hole displayed ragged, torn fabric. Eldridge slapped the hat against his thigh, knocking the dust free. He placed the ruined headgear on his head. Sunlight pierced the hole, warming his scalp. The damaged hat represented a personal insult. A good hat required years of shaping and sweat. Vasquez's men had ruined it in a single volley. He approached the dead man lying in the ravine. He recognized the face. A cowhand from the Silver Star Saloon. He searched the man's pockets. He discovered a handful of silver coins and a matchbook bearing the saloon's custom stamp. The evidence confirmed his assumption. Eldridge retrieved his pocket watch. He snapped the silver case shut. He looked north toward the cool mountains. He looked south toward the baked town of Ocotillo. Vasquez desired a toll. Vasquez sent amateurs to collect it. Vasquez owed a debt for the hat and the ambush. Eldridge returned to his horse. He collected the reins. He swung into the saddle. The vacation required a postponement. The ledger in Ocatillo demanded a balance. "Change of plans," Eldridge told the horse. "The mountain streams require a delay. We return to the dust." Eldridge turned the bay horse south. He spurred the animal into a trot. He rode for town. Chapter 6. Dead men gain weight the second their lungs quit. Eldridge Sample discovered this truth again, as he hauled the man in the brown leather vest over the saddle of a captured sorrel horse. The body hung limp, a sack of loose joints and cooling meat. Blood saturated the leather vest, dark and sticky, smearing against Eldridge's canvas coat. The sorrel horse fought the scent of death. It laid its ears flat against its skull and sidestepped, rolling a wild white eye. Eldridge grabbed the bridle near the bit. He jerked the horse's head down, forcing it to stand. "Hold your ground," Eldridge ordered the animal. He threw a loop of hemp rope over the dead man's waist, securing him to the saddle horn with a diamond hitch. He turned his attention to the second casualty. Ramon, the man who took the .45 to 70 slug in the chest. Ramon proved heavier. The impact of the heavy rifle round had shattered his spine, leaving him folded at a grotesque angle. Eldridge gripped the man by the belt and the collar, hoisting him up. He laid Ramon face down across the rear of the saddle, right behind his partner. The two corpses formed a macabre cross over the sorrel's back. Eldridge lashed their ankles together under the horse's belly. He checked the knots. He tested the tension. The cargo remained secure. Flies found the blood within minutes. They arrived in a buzzing cloud, a black halo hovering over the dead men. The desert heat accelerated the process, baking the copper scent of spilled life into the dry air. Eldridge retrieved his ruined hat from the dirt. He pushed his fingers through the bullet hole in the crown one last time, acknowledging the fraction of an inch that separated him from the cargo on the sorrel. He settled the hat on his head. He mounted his bay horse. He took the sorrel's lead rope in his left hand. He turned the horses south. He rode toward Ocotillo. He maintained a deliberate walk. He offered zero haste. He wanted the sun to drop lower. He wanted the shadows to stretch long across the main street. He wanted an audience. The 10 miles of scrub brush passed in a rhythmic, monotonous clatter of iron shoes on baked earth. The flies kept pace, a persistent hum behind his ears. The dead men bled the last of their reserves down the flanks of the sorrel horse, painting dark, wet stripes on the animal's coat. Ocatillo materialized out of the heat haze like a collection of discarded lumber. The false fronts of the buildings caught the late afternoon sun, glowing a bruised orange. Eldridge reached the town limits sign. He did not skirt the edges. He did not seek the alleys. He rode straight down the center of the main thoroughfare. A blacksmith working an anvil outside his shop brought his hammer down. He held the tool suspended in the air. He stared at the approaching rider. He stared at the pack horse. He let the hammer rest on the iron block. He took a step backward into the shadows of his forge. A woman carrying a basket of laundry stopped on the boardwalk. She dropped the basket. White sheets spilled into the dirt. She covered her mouth with both hands and backed away, pressing her spine against the wall of the mercantile. The silence spread down the street, moving faster than the horses. It moved like a physical wave, suffocating the normal sounds of commerce. Men sitting on rain barrels stood up and removed their hats. A stray dog sniffed the air, whined, and slunk under a raised porch. Eldridge kept his eyes forward. He let his right hand rest flat against his thigh, 2 inches from the walnut grip of the Colt Peacemaker. He watched the rooftops. He checked the gaps between the buildings. He looked for the glint of a rifle barrel. He found none. The town possessed zero preparation for this display. He had caught them flat-footed. He approached the Silver Star Saloon. Piano music drifted through the batwing doors, a lively ragtime tune that felt absurd against the approaching procession. Eldridge halted the bay horse directly in front of the saloon. The sorrel stopped behind him. The flies buzzed loud in the sudden quiet of the street. The piano player hit a wrong chord, stopped playing, and abandoned the bench. Faces appeared in the saloon windows. Men peered over the frosted glass, their eyes wide, registering the burden on the sorrel. The bat-wing doors swung open. Dutch stepped onto the boardwalk. The enforcer wore a clean white shirt and a fresh canvas duster. He lacked his usual, fluid swagger. He moved with a rigid spine. His shoulders remained stiff. The heavy ash handle of the pitchfork had left a lasting impression on his ribcage. Dutch stopped at the edge of the wooden planks. He looked at Eldridge. He looked at the sorrel horse. He recognized the brand on the horse's hip. He recognized the boots hanging from the saddle. His face shifted from pale shock to a deep mottled red. The veins in his thick neck pulsed against his collar. His hands balled into fists at his sides. "You bring garbage to my door," Dutch growled. His voice carried the rough texture of crushed stone. Eldridge wrapped the bay's reins around the saddle horn. He drew the heavy Bowie knife from the sheath on his belt. The blade caught the dying sun, flashing a brilliant silver. Dutch flinched. He dropped his right hand toward his holstered revolver. Eldridge ignored the movement. He reached across the gap between the horses. He caught the main rope, securing the dead men to the saddle. He brought the knife edge against the taut hemp. He slashed. The rope parted with a sharp snap. Gravity took control. The two bodies slid off the leather. They hit the pine boards of the boardwalk with a heavy, wet thud. The impact sounded like sacks of wet grain striking the earth. Dust puffed up from the planks, swirling around Dutch's silver spurs. Ramon rolled onto his back. His sightless eyes stared up at the saloon awning. The man in the brown vest landed face down, his arm thrown out, his fingers brushing the toe of Dutch's boot. Blood began to pool on the pristine wood. Dutch stared at his dead men. He stared at the blood, creeping toward his footwear. He lifted his gaze to Eldridge. Absolute murder burned in his eyes. "Vasquez will peel the skin from your bones," Dutch whispered. "He will stake you over an anthill." Eldridge sheathed the knife. He rested his hand back on his thigh. He looked down at the enforcer. He evaluated the stiff posture, the injured ribs, the hesitation in the right hand. Dutch possessed the anger, but he lacked the speed. The pitchfork beating had stolen his edge. Eldridge tipped the brim of his ruined hat. He pointed a finger at the bullet hole in the crown. "Your boys lack marksmanship," Eldridge said. "They ruined a good piece of felt." "I will put the next bullet through your eye," Dutch promised. Eldridge shifted his weight in the saddle. He looked at the bodies. He looked at the blood staining the Silver Star's porch. "You overcharged me on the visitor's tax," Eldridge said. His voice echoed loud and clear down the silent street, ensuring every hidden face heard the words. He picked up his reins. He looked Dutch dead in the eye. "Keep the change," Eldridge said. He clicked his tongue. He spurred the bay horse into a walk. He did not look back. He rode down the center of the street, heading toward the livery stable, leaving Hector Vasquez's enforcer standing ankle-deep in the consequences of a bad ambush. Chapter 7. Hector Vasquez stepped out of the Silver Star saloon. He ignored the bat-wing doors swinging behind him. He ignored the piano player who had frozen mid-chord. He focused his absolute attention on the two dead men bleeding onto the pine planks of his porch. He wore his tailored gray suit. The silver conchos on his hatband caught the fading sunlight. He possessed the refined look of a big city banker, but his eyes belonged to a slaughterhouse floor. He studied the dead faces. Ramon, and the kid who favored brown leather vests. Dutch stood a few feet away. The enforcer remained stiff, his clothes still damp from the horse trough, his knuckles white where he gripped his gun belt. "He rode right down the center line," Dutch said. His voice carried a defensive rasp. "He dumped them, and he kept going." Vasquez did not look at Dutch. He kept his gaze on Raymond's shattered chest. "You took 4 men," Vasquez said. The volume of his voice sat low, forcing Dutch to lean in to hear. "You took 4 men to collect a $10 toll from a drifter. 2 return, draped over a saddle. The other 2 remain missing." "He holds an advantage with that buffalo gun," Dutch argued. "He caught them in a funnel." "He caught them because you sent fools to do a professional job," Vasquez corrected. He raised his head. He looked down the street toward the livery stable. The dust from the drifter's departure still hung in the air. "Lock the town," Vasquez ordered. "Boss." "Seal the streets. Put 2 men with rifles on the bank roof. Put 2 more on the hotel balcony. Block the North Road and the South Bridge. Nobody leaves Ocotillo. Nobody enters." "He already rode down to the livery," Dutch said. "He might have slipped out the back." "He remains here," Vasquez stated. He possessed absolute certainty. A man who brings the bodies back does not run. He intends to finish the conversation. "I want him found. I want him brought to the back room of the assayer's office. Alive, if possible. Dead, if necessary. But I prefer him breathing when I start asking questions." Dutch nodded. He turned to shout orders to the men gathering in the street. Vasquez stepped back inside the saloon. He required a fresh cup of coffee and a moment to recalculate his ledger. 3 blocks away, the livery stable smelled of sweet alfalfa, old leather, and ammonia. The interior sat deep in shadow. The evening sun failed to penetrate the high, dusty windows. Eldridge Sample stood inside the double doors. He had unbuckled his spurs and left them hanging on his saddle horn. His boots made 0 sound against the packed earth aisle. He held the Colt Peacemaker in his right hand. Cobb, the liveryman, emerged from the tack room. He limped heavily, carrying a pitchfork. He saw Eldridge. He stopped. He pointed a dirt-stained finger toward the last stall on the left. Eldridge nodded. He moved down the aisle. He heard the breathing first. Short, ragged gasps. The sound a man makes when he tries to inhale without expanding his ribcage. Eldridge slipped past the wooden partition. A man sat huddled in the corner of the stall, half buried in loose straw. He wore a canvas jacket covered in the red dust of the northern ridge. He cradled his left arm against his chest. The arm hung at an unnatural angle, the forearm swelling against the fabric of his sleeve. His horse had likely rolled on him during the panicked retreat from the canyon. The man heard the rustle of straw. He looked up. His eyes widened. He reached for the revolver holstered on his right hip with his good hand. Eldridge closed the gap in 2 strides. He kicked the man's right wrist. The boot connected hard. The man yelped, his hand flying away from the gun grip. Eldridge dropped to one knee. He jammed the cold steel barrel of the Colt directly under the man's chin, forcing his head back against the rough pine boards of the stall. "Make a sound," Eldridge suggested, "and you lose your jaw." The man swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed against the gun barrel. Sweat tracked through the grime on his face. "You the one from the canyon," the man whispered. "You owe me a new hat," Eldridge said. "I didn't shoot your hat. Ramon took that shot." "Ramon settled his account," Eldridge said. "You still hold a balance." "Name?" "Pike." "Pike," Eldridge repeated. "You ran all the way back here to hide in the straw. You avoided your boss. Why?" "Vasquez kills failures," Pike gasped. "He hates paying for mistakes." "Vasquez runs a tight ledger," Eldridge said. "That interests me. I possess a curiosity about his bookkeeping." Pike stared at him. "Bookkeeping?" Eldridge shifted his weight. He moved his left hand. He clamped his fingers around Pike's broken left forearm. Pike stiffened. His eyes bulged. "Vasquez collects a toll from everyone in Ocotillo," Eldridge said. His voice remained conversational, steady. "He squeezes the saloons. He squeezes the general store. He squeezes the school teacher. That generates a large volume of cash. Cash requires storage. Cash requires a record." "I don't know nothing about the money," Pike said. He tried to pull his arm away. Eldridge tightened his grip. He squeezed the swollen flesh over the fractured bone. Pike let out a muffled shriek. He squeezed his eyes shut. Tears leaked from the corners. His body arched against the wall. "Lying causes discomfort," Eldridge observed. He maintained the pressure. The bone grated underneath his palm. "I ask again, where does the collection go?" "The assayer's office." Pike hissed through clenched teeth. "Stop. Please." Eldridge eased the pressure. He did not release the arm. He kept his hand positioned over the brake. "The assayer's office," Eldridge prompted. "Back room," Pike panted. He dragged air into his lungs. "He uses the big iron safe. The assayer, he works for Vasquez. He melts down the gold. He stacks the greenbacks." "And the record?" "The black book," Pike said. "The ledger. Vasquez keeps it in the safe. He writes down every dime, every name. He uses it to keep the town in line. If a man comes up short, Vasquez reads the debt out loud before Dutch breaks his fingers. He documents his extortion," Eldridge said. "Arrogant. He considers himself a businessman. He likes orderly columns." Eldridge processed the information. A safe. A ledger. A central location holding the entire financial lifeblood of the protection racket. You take the money, you cripple the operation. You take the ledger, you destroy the leverage. "How many men guard the assayer's office at night?" Eldridge asked. "None," Pike said. Eldridge applied a fraction of pressure to the broken arm. "Two." Pike corrected instantly, his voice hitching. "2 men. Inside. They sleep on cots in the front room. They keep shotguns." Eldridge released the arm completely. He stood up. He plucked Pike's revolver from the holster and tucked it into his own waistband. Pike cradled his ruined arm. He looked up at the drifter. He saw zero mercy. He saw a man calculating the next phase of a demolition. "You intend to hit the safe," Pike realized. "You possess a genuine death wish. Vasquez will put 100 men on the street." "Vasquez already put his men on the street," Eldridge said. He stepped backward, fading toward the stall entrance. "That leaves the back rooms empty." "What about me?" Pike asked. "You sleep in the straw," Eldridge said. "You wake up, you start walking to Mexico. Ocatillo offers zero future for you." Eldridge left the stall. He walked down the center aisle. Cobb waited near the front doors, leaning on the pitchfork. "You get what you needed?" Cobb asked. "I got an address," Eldridge said. He walked to the bay horse. He checked his saddlebags. He withdrew a box of .45 caliber cartridges. He fed fresh rounds into the loops of his gun belt, replacing the ones he spent on the porch of the Silver Star. The sun dropped below the horizon. The shadows inside the livery turned solid black. Outside, the town grew quiet, bracing for the violence it knew hovered just out of sight. Eldridge Sample stepped out the back door of the stable, slipping into the alleyway. He traded the role of the hunted for the role of the hunter, aiming his boots toward the assayer's office and the black book that held a town hostage. Chapter 8. Dutch required a victim. The pitchfork handle had left a deep purple bruise across his sternum. Every drawn breath pulled tight against the damaged muscle, sending a sharp spike of pain through his chest. Vasquez had stripped his dignity on the saloon porch. The boss had dressed him down in front of the men, pointing at the dead bodies leaking blood onto the pine planks. The town had watched him stand in a puddle of failure. Dutch needed to re-establish the hierarchy. He needed the town to witness his authority. He marched down Elm Street. He ignored the lockdown orders Vasquez had issued. He desired an audience, but he settled for a demonstration. He aimed his boots toward Mrs. Gable's boarding house. The two-story Victorian structure sat at the end of the block, boasting a fresh coat of blue paint and a wraparound porch. It housed the respectable elements of Ocotillo. It housed the schoolteacher. Abigail Trent owed a debt. Dutch intended to collect it tonight. He planned to drag her out of her bed, pull her by her hair down the center of Elm Street, and throw her through the back door of the Silver Star. The drovers needed entertainment. The town needed a reminder of who held the leash. He climbed the porch steps. His silver spurs dug deep gouges into the painted wood. He did not bother knocking. He raised his right boot. He drove his heel directly into the brass lockplate of the front door. The pine frame splintered. The heavy iron latch tore free from the jamb. The door slammed open, rebounding off the interior plaster wall with a violent crash. Dutch stepped into the foyer. The house sat dark. A grandfather clock ticked a slow, measured rhythm in the corner. The air smelled of beeswax and dried lavender. "Miss Trent," Dutch roared. His voice shattered the quiet. A door clicked open upstairs. Mrs. Gable, a small woman wearing a flannel nightcap, peered over the banister. She held a trembling hand against her mouth. "Get back in your room, old woman," Dutch commanded. "I hold zero business with you. Send the teacher down." Mrs. Gable vanished. Her door shut, and a deadbolt slid into place. Dutch stepped into the parlor. Moonlight cut through the lace curtains, painting pale stripes across the Persian rug. He unhooked the leather thong from the hammer of his revolver. He wanted his hand free. He wanted her to see the iron. "Time to pay the rent, Abigail," Dutch called out. He paced across the rug. "Come down those stairs right now. You make me climb them, I break your jaw before I drag you to the saloon." Silence answered him. "You hear me?" Dutch yelled. "She hears you," a voice said. The voice originated from a high-backed wing chair in the darkest corner of the parlor. The tone sat flat, entirely devoid of stress or hurry. Dutch froze. The hairs on the back of his neck stood at attention. He recognized the unhurried cadence. He recognized the confidence. "The drifter," Dutch whispered. "Bullies possess predictable habits," Eldridge Sample said from the shadows. "They get hit in the mouth by a stronger man. They seek out a softer target to punch. They need to balance their own internal ledger." Dutch dropped his right hand toward the staghorn grip of his revolver. He abandoned the plan for the girl. He calculated the distance to the corner. He anticipated the weight of the gun filling his palm. Eldridge did not draw his Colt. He uncoiled from the chair. He crossed the Persian rug in two silent, gliding strides. He moved with the fluid speed of a striking snake. Dutch cleared the leather. He started to raise the barrel. Eldridge intercepted the movement. He clamped his left hand over the cylinder of Dutch's revolver, pinning the weapon and trapping Dutch's fingers against the trigger guard. The mechanical action locked tight. Dutch grunted, attempting to wrench his arm free. He leveraged his heavy shoulders, pulling backward. Eldridge utilized the momentum. He stepped inside Dutch's guard. He brought his right hand down in a brutal, rigid chop. He struck the outside of Dutch's forearm, directly above the wrist joint. The bone snapped. The impact produced a sharp, dry sound, identical to a heavy boot breaking a thick, dead branch in a quiet forest. Dutch released a high, wet shriek. His knees buckled. He dropped to the floor. He cradled his ruined right hand against his stomach. The fingers pointed outward at a grotesque, unnatural angle. The skin immediately began to swell, turning a dark, mottled red. Eldridge plucked the useless revolver from the holster. He broke the cylinder open, dumped the heavy brass cartridges onto the rug, and tossed the empty weapon into the unlit fireplace. It clattered against the brick. "You draw slow," Eldridge said. "You learn slower." Dutch writhed on the floor. He squeezed his eyes shut, gasping for oxygen through the blinding pain. Saliva dripped from his chin onto the expensive wool rug. "You broke it," Dutch sobbed. "You shattered the joint." "I retired your drawing hand," Eldridge corrected. "I possess zero tolerance for men who hunt women in the dark. You require a new profession, Dutch. I suggest bookkeeping. You can learn to write with your left." A door opened at the top of the stairs. Abigail Trent stepped onto the landing. She held a glass kerosene lamp high, throwing a circle of yellow light down into the parlor. She wore a heavy canvas coat over a simple cotton dress. She carried a small leather valise in her left hand. She walked down the stairs. Her eyes locked on the man writhing on the floor. She looked at the twisted, swollen hand. She looked at Eldridge standing over him. "You bring the war into my parlor," Abigail stated. "The war already lived here," Eldridge said. "I just changed the casualty list." Abigail set the lamp on a side table. She placed her valise on a chair. She did not display fear. She displayed a cold, hard pragmatism. "He threatened to drag me," Abigail said. "He holds zero capacity for dragging anyone now," Eldridge replied. "He struggles to crawl." Dutch groaned. He opened his eyes and glared at Eldridge. Hate radiated from his face, pushing through the agony. "Vasquez will stake you to an anthill," Dutch wheezed. "He locked the town down. He put men on the roofs. You possess zero exit strategy." "I hold the itinerary," Eldridge said. He nudged Dutch's rib cage with the toe of his boot. "You tell your boss I intend to audit his books tonight. You tell him the visitor's tax just doubled." Eldridge turned his attention to Abigail. "You packed a bag," Eldridge noted. "I heard the door break," she said. "I expected him. I plan to slip out the back window and run for the hills." "The hills offer zero shelter tonight," Eldridge said. "Vasquez has men combing the perimeter. You need a place inside the town. A place they ignore. Ocotillo holds no safe harbor from Hector Vasquez." "Every town holds one blind spot," Eldridge said. "The church. The building at the end of Main Street. Reverend Miller locks the doors at sundown." "Locks break," Eldridge said. "I noticed a cellar door on the east side of the foundation. It leads under the sanctuary. Vasquez searches the saloons and the liveries. He respects the church walls. He avoids holy ground when he hunts." Abigail picked up her valise. She adjusted the heavy coat. "I hide in a dirt cellar," she said. "You lay low," Eldridge instructed. "You keep quiet. You wait until the shooting stops." "When does the shooting stop?" "When the ledger balances," Eldridge said. He walked to the front window. He pulled the lace curtain aside 1 inch. He scanned the dark street. Elm Street remained empty. The town held its breath, waiting for the violence to erupt. "The street sits clear," Eldridge said. "Move fast. Keep to the alleys." Avoid the moonlight. Abigail walked to the shattered front door. She stopped and looked back at Dutch. The enforcer continued to rock back and forth on the rug, nursing his destroyed hand. "Tell Mr. Vasquez the school teacher cancels her debt," Abigail said. She stepped through the broken door frame, fading into the shadows of the porch and disappearing into the night. Eldridge watched her go. He admired her spine. She possessed grit. He looked down at Dutch. "Your turn to move," Eldridge ordered. "I need a doctor," Dutch gasped. "I need morphia." "You need to walk to the Silver Star," Eldridge said. "You need to show Vasquez that hand. You need to deliver my message." "I bleed." "Bleed on the boardwalk," Eldridge said. "Make a trail. Give them something to follow." Eldridge stepped over the enforcer. He walked out the front door, leaving Dutch alone in the parlor to contemplate a future without a right hand, and a town that was rapidly slipping out of his control. Eldridge turned south, heading toward the commercial district, aiming his boots toward the assayer's office and the iron safe that held the lifeblood of Hector Vasquez. Chapter 9. "They sleep," Eldridge Sample whispered to the night. He stood in the narrow alley behind the Ocotillo assayer's office. He rested his hand against the rough brick wall. He listened to the rhythm of the building. The structure breathed with a low, repetitive rasp. Two distinct snores vibrated through the thin wood of the rear door. Pike had told the truth in the livery stable. 2 guards inside. The back door featured a heavy brass padlock securing an iron hasp. Eldridge reached into the pocket of his canvas coat. He withdrew a stiff piece of steel wire, bent at a sharp angle at one end. A souvenir from a broken fence line. He inserted the wire into the keyhole. He applied tension. He manipulated the internal tumblers, feeling the brass pins catch and hold. The lock clicked open. Eldridge removed the padlock. He set it on a rain barrel. He lifted the iron hasp. He pushed the door inward. The hinges screamed. A sharp, high-pitched squeal of metal grinding on dry metal. Eldridge froze. He kept his hand on the door frame. He waited for the snoring to stop. He waited for the sound of boots hitting the floorboards, for the clack of a shotgun action. The snoring continued, uninterrupted. Whiskey sleep provides a thick blanket. He stepped into the office. The air inside tasted bitter. The scent of burnt sulfur, nitric acid, and pulverized quartz coated the back of his throat. Moonlight filtered through a barred front window, illuminating the dust motes hanging in the stagnant air. He identified the layout. The front room served as a reception area and sleeping quarters. 2 canvas cots occupied the floor space. 2 men occupied the cots. They lay on their backs, mouths open, contributing to the harsh symphony of the room. Eldridge moved across the floor. He placed his boots with absolute precision, avoiding the loose boards. He located their weapons. A pair of double-barreled shotguns leaned against the wall near the front door. A sensible place for men expecting a frontal assault. A terrible place for men expecting a ghost. Eldridge gathered both shotguns. He held them by the barrels. He walked back to the rear door. He stepped into the alley. He dropped the weapons into the full rain barrel. They sank to the bottom, settling into the muck and algae. Defanged. He returned to the interior. He bypassed the sleeping men. He headed for the back room. The assayer's workroom contained a long wooden table covered in scales, crucibles, and glass vials. In the far corner sat the objective. A heavy, cast-iron Mosler safe. It measured 4 feet high, painted black, featuring a gleaming brass dial in the center of the door. Eldridge knelt before the iron box. He placed his fingertips on the cold dial. Cracking a Mosler requires time, absolute silence, and sensitive fingertips. He possessed 0 time. He stood up. He walked to the assayer's desk. Men who weigh dust to the fraction of an ounce live by numbers. They trust ink. They distrust memory. He pulled the top drawer open. Blank receipts. Pen nibs. A bottle of black ink. He pushed it shut. He moved to the green leather blotter resting on the center of the desk. He lifted the corner. He found a piece of scratch paper containing arithmetic. He tossed it aside. He lifted the blotter completely. A sequence of 3 numbers sat written in pencil directly on the polished oak wood. 14. 32. 18. Eldridge memorized the sequence. He returned to the safe. He gripped the brass dial. He spun the wheel left, passing the 0 mark 3 times, stopping dead on 14. He reversed direction, turning right, stopping on 32. He turned left again, settling on 18. He gripped the heavy iron handle. He pressed his thumb against the latch release. He pulled. The massive door swung open on oiled hinges. The interior of the safe offered a tidy display of extortion. 3 heavy canvas sacks occupied the bottom shelf. Eldridge squeezed the nearest sack. Minted gold coins rubbed against each other inside the fabric. A stack of greenbacks bound with twine sat on the middle shelf. A fortune built on the fear of shopkeepers and school teachers. Eldridge ignored the currency. He reached for the top shelf. He retrieved a thick book bound in black leather. The spine showed heavy use. He opened the cover. He angled the pages toward the moonlight filtering through the doorway. Neat, precise columns filled the paper. Names ran down the left side. Higgins, Trent, Miller, Cobb. Next to the names sat dates. Next to the dates sat dollar amounts. Some entries featured a red check mark. Some featured a black X. A red check mark indicated payment received. A black X indicated a visit from Dutch. Eldridge closed the book. He held Hector Vasquez's leverage in his left hand. Without the ledger, Vasquez lacked proof of debt. Without the ledger, the town owed nothing. Eldridge needed to leave a message. He wanted Vasquez to know the identity of the thief. He wanted the boss to feel the sting of the insult. He found a blank sheet of assay paper on the desk. He picked up a pencil. He placed the paper against the wood. He wrote a single sentence. Audit concluded. He drew the heavy Bowie knife from the sheath on his belt. The steel blade caught the ambient light. He placed the note in the center of the desk. He raised the knife. He drove the point through the paper, burying 3 inches of steel deep into the solid oak. The knife stood upright, a monument to the broken lock and the empty safe. He tucked the ledger under his arm. He left the safe door hanging wide open. He walked back into the front room. The snoring on the left cot stopped. The guard shifted his weight. The canvas material creaked under him. The man smacked his lips, tasting old whiskey. He opened his eyes. He stared at the ceiling. He turned his head. He saw a tall shape standing between him and the back door. A shape wearing a long canvas coat, holding a book. The guard blinked, trying to clear the sleep from his vision. He reached out a hand, feeling the empty space against the wall where he had left his shotgun. "Hey," the guard mumbled. His voice cracked with dry sleep. "Who is that?" Eldridge closed the distance. He stood over the cot. He looked down at the confused face. "The night shift," Eldridge said. He raised the Colt Peacemaker. He brought the heavy steel barrel down in a short, controlled arc. He struck the guard on the side of the head, connecting solid with the temple. The man released a soft grunt. His eyes rolled up. He went limp against the mattress, tumbling back into a sleep deeper than whiskey. The second guard continued to snore, oblivious to the violence 2 feet away. Eldridge adjusted the ledger under his arm. He stepped out the back door. He pulled the wooden panel shut. He walked down the alley, melting into the shadows of Ocotillo. He carried the black book, knowing the morning sun would bring a firestorm to the town when Hector Vasquez discovered the source of his power missing from the iron box. Chapter 10. The Ocatillo lumberyard smelled of raw pitch and fresh sawdust. Mountains of cut timber created a grid of deep canyons and blind corners. The moon offered zero light down in the alleys between the stacks. Hector Vasquez sent 4 men to sweep the dark. They arrived with rifles and bad intentions. Corbo led the squad. He carried a shuttered lantern. A narrow slit of yellow light cut across the dirt, exposing the footprints of the workers who had gone home at dusk. "Spread out," Corbo ordered. His voice carried a rough edge. "Check the gaps. He hides in the dark." Miller went left. Gaines went right. A kid named Smith stayed tight to Corbo's flank. Eldridge Sample sat 10 feet above them, perched on a stack of seasoned oak. He held the black ledger book in his left hand. His right hand rested on the Colt Peacemaker. A pistol serves poor duty in a maze. He required a wider spread. He required a scattergun. He watched Miller separate from the pack. Miller walked down a narrow aisle of pine boards. He carried a greener 10-gauge double-barrel shotgun. He held it at port arms. He pulled loud, nervous breaths through his mouth. Eldridge moved. He dropped from the oak stack. He landed on the soft sawdust behind Miller. His boots made zero sound. Miller stopped. He felt the shift in the air. He started to turn. Eldridge lunged. He drove the heavy steel barrel of the Colt straight into the base of Miller's skull. The crunch of bone signaled the end of Miller's night. The man collapsed, his knees folding like wet paper. Eldridge caught the shotgun before it hit the dirt. He eased Miller to the ground. He holstered the Colt. He checked the breech of the greener. 2 brass shells sat in the chambers. Double-aught buckshot. He patted Miller's pockets. He extracted 4 extra shells and shoved them into his canvas coat. Corbo heard the scuffle. The sound of a body hitting sawdust travels. "Miller," Corbo called out. Silence answered him. "Gaines," Corbo commanded. "Circle around the pine stack. Find him." Gaines moved deep into the maze. He kept his back pressed against the rough wood. He turned a corner, leading with his Winchester rifle. Eldridge stood at the far end of the aisle. He raised the greener to his shoulder. Gaines saw the shadow. He snapped his rifle up to fire. Eldridge pulled the front trigger. The 10-gauge roared. The explosion inside the narrow timber walls delivered a physical punch to the chest. The cloud of buckshot hit Gaines dead center. The impact lifted him off his feet. He crashed backward into a towering stack of 2x4s. The rope bindings snapped. An avalanche of heavy lumber collapsed on top of his ruined body. Wood dust billowed into the air. Corbo and Smith reacted with panic. They fired blind shots into the dark, chewing up the wood. Splinters rained down on the dirt. "He has a shotgun," Smith yelled. The kid's voice cracked. "Miller is gone." "Shut your mouth and reload," Corbo ordered. Eldridge abandoned his position. He slipped through a gap between 2 piles of cedar. The heavy ledger sat secure inside his coat. He navigated by the scent of the wood and the sound of panicked men racking levers. He held the advantage of motion. They held the disadvantage of fear. He flanked them. He stepped out behind Smith. The kid fumbled with a handful of cartridges, attempting to feed his rifle. His hands shook. He dropped 2 rounds in the dirt. Eldridge leveled the greener. He kept the second barrel in reserve. "Drop the iron," Eldridge commanded. Smith spun around. He brought the rifle to bear. He chose poor odds. Eldridge pulled the rear trigger. The blast caught Smith in the right shoulder. The kinetic shock spun the kid like a top. He dropped his rifle. He fell into the sawdust, clutching the shredded meat of his arm. He unleashed a high, piercing scream. Corbo stood 20 feet away in the main aisle. He witnessed the muzzle flash. He saw his squad dismantled in less than 3 minutes. He raised his revolver and fired 3 quick shots at the fading smoke. The bullets embedded themselves deep in the oak stack. Eldridge stepped behind the wood. He broke the greener open. The twin ejectors spit the smoking brass casings into the dark. He retrieved 2 fresh shells from his pocket. He shoved them into the breech. He snapped the action shut. The metallic clack echoed clear over Smith's screams. Corbo stopped shooting. His hammer clicked on an empty chamber. He stood trapped between the high timber walls. He held useless iron. Eldridge stepped out from the shadows. He aimed the reloaded shotgun at Corbo's chest. Corbo looked at the twin black holes of the barrels. He dropped his empty pistol. He raised both hands above his head. "I surrender," Corbo stated. His voice lacked the rough edge now. "You carry a message," Eldridge said. Eldridge closed the distance. He stopped 10 feet from the squad leader. "You return to the Silver Star," Eldridge instructed. "You tell Hector Vasquez his night crew failed the sweep. You tell him I hold the black book. I know the names. I know the exact numbers. I hold his leverage." Corbo swallowed hard. He looked down at Smith, writhing on the ground. "He will kill you," Corbo said. "He owns 100 men." "He requires better men for the job," Eldridge replied. "Walk away. Take the kid with the ruined shoulder. Leave the dead for the morning." Corbo moved to Smith. He hauled the crying kid to his feet. They stumbled down the aisle, heading toward the street exit, dragging a trail of blood through the sawdust. Eldridge watched them depart. He lowered the shotgun. He patted the canvas coat, feeling the solid rectangle of the ledger against his ribs. The first cut ran deep. The town of Ocotillo belonged to the dark, and Eldridge owned the shadows. Chapter 11. "You surrendered the lumberyard to one man," Hector Vasquez said. He stood behind the mahogany bar of the Silver Star saloon. Morning sunlight poured through the front windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stale air. He wore his tailored gray suit. A pristine white shirt collar framed his neck. He projected absolute calm. Corbo stood in the center of the room. He twisted a dirty Stetson in his hands. Flakes of dried blood crusted his shirt sleeves, a souvenir from dragging a wounded kid through the sawdust hours ago. He refused to meet his boss's eyes. "He owns the dark," Corbo said. His voice carried a tremor. "He uses a 10-gauge scattergun. He moves like smoke. Gaines lies dead under 2 tons of cut pine. Miller caught a pistol barrel to the base of his skull. Smith lost his shoulder." "You outmanned him 4-1, Vasquez observed. "Numbers fail to matter when you cannot see the target," Corbo countered. He pointed a trembling finger toward the street. "He wears that canvas coat. He haunts the alleys. My men refuse to go back out there. They call him a ghost." "Ghosts bleed," Vasquez stated. "They bleed when you puncture them." Vasquez reached under the bar. He brought his hand up and slammed a heavy Bowie knife point first into the polished wood. The blade quivered. A piece of square assay paper remained impaled on the steel. Corbo stared at the paper. "The night guards at the assayer's office woke up an hour ago," Vasquez said. "They found the iron safe open. They found this knife stuck in the desk." Vasquez tapped the paper. "He took the black book," Vasquez said. "He holds the ledger." A chair scraped the floorboards. Dutch sat at a corner table. A crude sling, fashioned from a torn bedsheet, supported his right arm. His shattered wrist throbbed, sending waves of nausea through his gut. He drank rye whiskey from a glass held in his left hand. "He holds the names," Dutch grunted. "He holds the amounts. He knows the math." "He holds our leverage," Vasquez corrected. Without the ledger, the debts evaporated. The precise record of extortion provided the foundation of Vasquez's power. It proved who paid and who owed. It legitimized the violence. Without it, they operated as simple thugs, vulnerable to a coordinated uprising. "The town knows," Dutch said. He set his glass down. "Word travels fast. A baker's boy saw him dump the bodies on our porch yesterday. A faro dealer heard him break my arm. The whole street smells the blood in the water." "We maintain order," Vasquez ordered. "We project strength. The collection schedule remains intact." He turned his gaze to a man leaning against the doorframe. Farnham, a mid-level enforcer who favored a pearl-handled revolver and a cheap derby hat. "Farnham," Vasquez said. "Cross the street. Go to Stanton's Mercantile. Collect the morning tax. Make a public display." Farnham hesitated. He looked at Corbo. He looked at Dutch's ruined arm. "Go," Vasquez commanded. The tone allowed zero room for debate. Farnham pushed off the doorframe. He adjusted his gun belt. He stepped through the batwing doors and descended onto the dirt street. Vasquez moved to the front window. He pulled the lace curtain aside 2 inches. He watched Farnham walk across the thoroughfare. Corbo and Dutch remained silent. They felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. The predator confidence had cracked. Farnham reached the boardwalk outside the Mercantile. He climbed the wooden steps. Elias Stanton stood on his porch. The storekeeper wore a heavy canvas apron over his shirt. He held a broom, sweeping dirt into the street. He watched Farnham approach. Stanton did not drop his eyes. He did not retreat behind his oak door. He planted his boots wide. Farnham stopped 3 feet away. He stuck out his hand, palm up. Vasquez watched the pantomime through the glass. He read the body language. Farnham demanded the envelope. Stanton stopped sweeping. He leaned his weight on the broom handle. He shook his head. A slow, deliberate negative. Farnham puffed out his chest. He tapped the pearl handle of his revolver. He issued a threat. Stanton reached behind a stack of flour barrels. He brought up a Winchester rifle. He did not aim it. He rested the barrel across his forearm, his thumb hovering near the hammer. Stanton spoke a single sentence. The words failed to cross the street, but the meaning hit like a physical blow. Farnham took a step backward. His hand fell away from his gun. He looked up and down the street. Other merchants stood on their porches. The barber held a straight razor. The blacksmith gripped a heavy iron hammer. They all watched Farnham. They presented a unified front of quiet, armed defiance. Farnham turned around. He crossed the street with his head down. He hurried his pace. Vasquez let the curtain drop. He turned away from the window. The cold certainty in his chest curdled into genuine rage. The batwing doors swung open. Farnham stepped inside. He sweated through his shirt. "Stanton refuses," Farnham announced. He kept his voice low, afraid to let the admission fill the room. He says the ledger vanished. He says he owes $0. He says any man who steps on his porch gets a hole in his chest. You let a grocer face you down, Vasquez said. He held a rifle, boss. The others watched. The whole block is waiting for an excuse to open fire. They lost their fear. They found a champion, Dutch rasped from his table. The drifter handed them a spine. Vasquez walked the length of the bar. He picked up his demi-tasse cup of coffee. He took a sip. The liquid tasted bitter. He set the cup down with a sharp clink. We need to re-establish the hierarchy, Vasquez stated. We need a demonstration. You want to shoot Stanton? Corbo asked. Start a war in the street. A street war favors the numbers, Vasquez said. The town outnumbers us. We need to cut the head off the snake. We need the drifter in the open. We kill him in the sun, in front of the merchants. The fear returns. He refuses to fight in the sun, Corbo argued. He prefers the alleys. He prefers the high stacks. Men like him possess a weakness, Vasquez said. They carry a code. They protect the weak. They hate bullies. Vasquez looked at Dutch. You found him in a parlor last night, Vasquez said. Whose parlor? Dutch grimaced. He touched his sling. Mrs. Gable's boarding house, Dutch said. He waited in the dark. Who were you hunting? The school teacher, Dutch admitted. Abigail Trent. Her father owed the bank. I intended to bring her here to work off the debt. And the drifter intervened, Vasquez mused. He protected her. He broke your arm to keep her safe. He told her to hide, Dutch said. Hide where? Dutch closed his eyes, recalling the exchange in the dim room. The church, Dutch said. He told her to take the cellar door on the east foundation. He said we respect holy ground. Vasquez smiled. The expression lacked any trace of warmth. It resembled a wolf recognizing a lame sheep. He considers us predictable, Vasquez said. He considers us superstitious. Vasquez walked to the Bowie knife stuck in the bar. He yanked the heavy blade free. He balled the piece of assay paper in his fist and threw it to the floorboards. Corbo, Vasquez commanded. Gather 3 men. Bring a crowbar. Bring heavy rope. Corbo swallowed hard. We go to the church? We breach the cellar, Vasquez said. We secure the teacher. And then we pin a note to the church door, Vasquez instructed. We offer a trade. We offer the girl for the ledger. We invite the ghost to step into the light. Vasquez sheathed the knife. He adjusted his cuffs. He wants to play the hero, Vasquez said. We give him a stage, and then we execute him on it. Chapter 12. Step aside, Reverend, Hector Vasquez suggested. The tone carried zero malice. It sounded like a bank manager asking a clerk to move out of the way of a filing cabinet. Reverend Miller stood on the top step of the Ocotillo Methodist Church. He wore a black suit coated in a fine layer of white alkali dust. He gripped a heavy brass-bound Bible in both hands, holding it flat against his chest like a breastplate. He looked at the 3 armed men gathered in his dirt yard. This building provides sanctuary, Miller said. His voice cracked, betraying the tremble in his knees. You carry weapons of war onto holy ground, Hector. The Lord watches. Vasquez adjusted the cuffs of his pristine white shirt. He looked up at the sun, then back at the preacher. The Lord watches a town refusing to pay its debts, Vasquez said. The Lord sees a drifter murdering my employees in the street. I require balance, Reverend. I require a conversation with the man who stole my property." "He remains absent from this house," Miller stated. "I know," Vasquez said. "But he left something behind." Vasquez gestured with a flick of 2 fingers. Corbo stepped forward. The squad leader had replaced his dirty Stetson with a clean one, but his eyes retained the frantic, haunted look of a man who had survived a massacre in a lumberyard. He reached the bottom step. He did not bother drawing his gun. He simply raised his left arm and drove the back of his hand across the Reverend's face. The heavy silver ring on Corbo's finger caught Miller on the cheekbone. The impact lifted the preacher off his feet. He fell backward, hitting the wooden planks of the porch with a hollow thump. The Bible skidded across the boards, dropping into the dust below. Vasquez stepped over the book. He walked past the groaning preacher. He turned the corner of the whitewashed building, heading toward the East Foundation. Corbo and the third man, a thick-necked enforcer named Tate, followed. They reached the side of the church. Weeds choked the narrow gap between the building and the neighboring property line. At the base of the foundation sat a set of slanted wooden cellar doors. A heavy iron hasp secured the 2 halves together, locked with a brass padlock. "The wood looks old," Vasquez observed. "The lock looks new." "She sits down there," Corbo said. "Dutch swore to it." "Open it." Tate stepped up. He carried a 3-foot iron crowbar, the flat end scored and battered from prying open freight crates. He wedged the pry bar under the iron hasp, right next to the brass lock. He planted his boots. He threw his entire weight backward. The old wood surrendered before the iron did. The screws holding the hasp tore free from the rotted pine, sending a shower of splinters into the air. Tate pulled the doors open. They flapped back against the dirt, revealing a square hole of absolute blackness plunging into the earth. The smell of cold dirt, old potatoes, and damp stone drifted up into the afternoon heat. Vasquez stepped to the edge. He peered down into the square. "Miss Trent," Vasquez called out. Silence answered him. "Abigail," Vasquez tried again, raising his volume. "You inhabit a dirt hole. You sit in the dark. I offer you a chance to step into the sunlight. Walk up the stairs." Nothing moved in the shadows below. Vasquez sighed. He looked at Tate. "Fetch her," Vasquez ordered. Tate dropped the crowbar. He reached into his coat and pulled a kerosene lantern. He struck a match, lit the wick, and adjusted the glass chimney. He took his revolver in his right hand, holding the lantern high in his left. He descended the wooden ladder, his heavy boots making the rungs groan. Vasquez and Corbo waited on the surface. They listened to the heavy tread of Tate's boots hitting the dirt floor of the cellar. A crash echoed from below. A stack of crates toppling over. "Get your hands off me," a woman screamed. A scuffle broke out. A distinct thud of flesh hitting flesh resonated up the shaft. Tate uttered a sharp, brutal curse. "She bites." Tate yelled. "Bring her up," Vasquez commanded. "Do not break her legs. She needs to walk." The ladder creaked again. Tate climbed up backward. He reached the surface and hauled a struggling figure out of the hole. Abigail Trent fought him for every inch. She wore a heavy canvas coat over her dress, her hair tangled with cobwebs and dirt. She twisted her shoulders, attempting to break Tate's grip on her collar. She kicked backward, driving the heel of her boot into Tate's shin. Tate grunted. He shoved her forward. She stumbled onto the grass, catching her balance before she fell. She spun around. She faced Hector Vasquez. She breathed hard, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with a bright, clean hatred. She wiped a smear of dirt from her chin. "You violate the church," Abigail said. "I conduct an audit," Vasquez corrected. He looked her up and down. He took in the canvas coat, identifying it immediately. You wear the drifter's coat. A touching gesture. It implies an alliance. He possesses more honor in his boots than you hold in your entire operation, Abigail said. Vasquez smiled. The expression chilled the air around them. Honor pays 0 dividends, Abigail. Honor leaves men bleeding in lumberyards. Ideal in pragmatism. Your father owed me $500. You refused to pay. The drifter assaulted my top lieutenant to protect you. He then stole my private ledger. He took your power, Abigail said. The town knows it. The town experiences a temporary delusion, Vasquez said. They believe a ghost can protect them from a bullet. I need to demonstrate the flaw in their thinking. Vasquez reached into the interior pocket of his gray suit jacket. He withdrew a piece of thick, cream-colored stationery and a silver fountain pen. He uncapped the pen. He pressed the paper against the clapboard siding of the church. He wrote a single, precise sentence. He capped the pen and returned it to his pocket. Tate, Vasquez said. Hold her arms. Tate moved behind Abigail. He grabbed her wrists, pinning them behind her back. She struggled, but the enforcer possessed the strength of a draft horse. Vasquez walked toward the front of the church. He carried the piece of stationery. He approached the heavy double oak doors at the main entrance. Reverend Miller remained on the porch, leaning against a pillar, pressing a bloody handkerchief to his split cheek. He watched Vasquez approach the doors. Vasquez reached into his pocket. He pulled out a 2-inch square cut iron nail. He placed the paper against the center of the right door. He positioned the nail over the top center of the page. He drew his revolver. He gripped it by the barrel. He used the heavy, flat steel butt of the grip as a hammer. He struck the nail head 3 times. Thack, thack, thack. The iron bit deep into the oak, pinning the note securely at eye level. Vasquez holstered his gun. He stepped back. He admired his handiwork. Read it, Reverend, Vasquez instructed. Miller squinted through his swelling eye. He read the elegant, flowing script. Bring the ledger to the canyon, or the teacher hangs. Miller looked at Vasquez. Absolute horror drained the remaining color from his face. You condemn an innocent woman, Miller whispered. I force a business transaction, Vasquez replied. I create a deadline. The drifter values her life. He gave her his coat. He sent her to your cellar. He considers her his responsibility. He will surrender the book to save her. Vasquez turned back to Corbo and Tate. Bind her wrists, Vasquez ordered. Put her on the spare horse. We ride to the Silver Star. The note says the canyon, boss, Corbo pointed out. The note tells the drifter to go to the canyon, Vasquez said. It sets a trap. I place 10 men with rifles in the high rocks of the gorge. They wait for him to ride in with the book. They execute him on sight. Abigail stopped struggling in Tate's grip. She stared at Vasquez. You lie, Abigail said. You establish an ambush. I establish a crossfire, Vasquez corrected. A very efficient one. And me, she asked. You remain in town, Vasquez said. You sit in the back office of my saloon. If my men fail to return with the ledger by sundown, Dutch gets his revenge. He constructs a gallows behind the livery. He hangs you in front of the townsfolk to prove the consequences of unpaid debts. Vasquez checked his silver pocket watch. He snapped the case shut. The ghost steps into the light today, Vasquez said. Or he watches his conscience swing from a rope. Chapter 13. The man possesses expensive taste in stationery, Eldridge Sample said. He gripped the head of the square-cut iron nail. He wrenched it free from the heavy oak door of the Methodist church. The thick cream-colored paper fluttered in his hand. Reverend Miller sat on the top step of the porch. The preacher pressed a blood-soaked handkerchief against his swelling cheekbone. The skin around his eye showed dark purple. He took shallow breaths. "He dragged her out of the earth," Miller said. The words lacked his usual pulpit thunder. "He pulled her from the cellar like an animal. I tried to block his path. Corbo struck me." Eldridge read the elegant, flowing script on the paper. "Bring the ledger to the canyon, or the teacher hangs." Eldridge folded the note. He slid the paper into the pocket of his canvas coat. "Vasquez sets a poor table," Eldridge said. "A canyon provides zero cover for a meeting. It provides high walls. It provides elevation for riflemen. You walk into a canyon holding a prize, you walk into a crossfire." "He will kill her," Miller stated. He lowered the handkerchief. "He holds zero regard for human life." "He holds a high regard for leverage," Eldridge corrected. "He needs the girl to get the book. He needs the book to control the town. Dead girls hold zero value in a negotiation." Eldridge looked down the main street. Ocotillo sat quiet. The citizens remained behind locked doors. The dust settled undisturbed. Hector Vasquez had demonstrated his reach, and the town had swallowed its newfound courage. "You intend to go to the canyon," Miller said. "I intend to inspect the canyon," Eldridge said. He turned away from the church. He walked back to the livery stable. He bypassed the main doors and slipped through the alley entrance. Cobb sat on a hay bale, holding his shotgun across his lap. The liverymen watched Eldridge approach. "They took the teacher," Cobb reported. "I read the invitation," Eldridge said. He walked to the stall. He grabbed the saddle blanket. "Saddle the bay. You ride out there, they turn you into a sieve," Cobb warned. He stood up, leaning on his pitchfork handle. The canyon outside of town forms a natural bowl. One way in, one way out. They put men on the rims, they shoot you from 3 sides. Eldridge threw the heavy western saddle over the horse's back. He grabbed the cinch strap. He pulled it tight. The horse grunted. "Vasquez thinks like a predator," Eldridge said. "Predators rely on pattern. They expect the prey to follow the blood trail straight into the jaws. What do you do?" "I step off the trail," Eldridge said. He led the bay horse out the rear doors. The sun punished the valley floor. Heat waves distorted the horizon. Eldridge swung into the saddle. He rode east, avoiding the direct northern route to the canyon. He took a wide arc through the broken badlands, putting 3 miles of scrub brush and jagged rock between himself and the town. He aimed for the high ground. 2 hours later, Eldridge tied the bay horse in the deep shade of a dry arroyo. He pulled the Springfield carbine from the leather scabbard. He checked the action. He verified the brass cartridge in the breech. He started his climb. He avoided the skyline. He kept his body pressed low against the limestone ridge, moving from boulder to boulder. The rock absorbed the afternoon sun, radiating heat into his chest and through the thick soles of his boots. Sweat stung his eyes. He ignored it. He reached the crest of the eastern ridge overlooking the canyon. He removed his hat. He slithered on his belly to the edge. He peered through a V-shaped notch in the stone. The canyon floor spread out below him. A wide sandy wash dotted with dead cedar trees and smooth river rocks. The air down there sat stagnant. Eldridge scanned the opposite rim. He searched for movement. He searched for geometric shapes that violated the natural chaos of the rock formations. A glint of metal caught his eye. A reflection off a gun barrel. He tracked the source. A man lay flat on his stomach on a sandstone ledge, 400 yards across the gap. The man sighted down a long-barreled Winchester, aiming at the canyon mouth. Eldridge shifted his gaze. He found another shape. A second rifleman, crouched behind a dead stump further down the western rim. He found a third man, nestled in a cluster of boulders near the canyon floor. 10 men, Eldridge calculated. He studied the canyon floor. He searched for Abigail Trent. He searched for the bait. He found a wooden chair placed dead center in the sandy wash. A heavy rope bound a figure to the chair. A flour sack covered the figure's head. Eldridge studied the shape. The shoulders slumped. The legs stretched out, encased in heavy denim trousers and worn work boots. Abigail Trent wore a blue cotton dress and button-down boots. Eldridge felt a cold, hard certainty settle into his gut. Vasquez protects his assets, Eldridge whispered to the stone. He pushed backward, slithering away from the edge. He retreated 10 yards down the slope. He stood up. He checked his immediate surroundings. A crossfire requires lookouts to cover the rear approach. Vasquez ran a disciplined crew. A disciplined crew places eyes on the back trail. Eldridge moved parallel to the ridgeline. He stepped with absolute care. He placed the toe of his boot first, feeling for loose gravel before committing his weight. He hunted the hunter. He found the scent before he saw the man. Tobacco smoke. The acrid smell drifted up from a shallow depression 50 yards ahead. Eldridge drew his heavy Bowie knife. He preferred silent steel over loud lead for a close-quarters audit. He approached the depression from the high side. He looked down. A man sat on a flat rock. He wore a gray duster and a wide-brimmed sombrero. He held a rifle across his knees. He faced away from the canyon, watching the southern approach from Ocotillo. He took a drag from a rolled cigarette. He exhaled a cloud of white smoke. He looked bored. Boredom breeds fatal mistakes. Eldridge stepped off the ledge. He dropped into the depression. His boots hit the dust 2 feet behind the lookout. The man heard the impact. He started to turn his head. He started to raise the rifle. Eldridge lunged. He clamped his left forearm around the man's throat, jerking his head backward. He brought his right hand up, pressing the cold steel edge of the Bowie knife against the man's carotid artery. The man froze. The cigarette dropped from his lips. It hit the dirt and smoldered. "Make a noise, you lose the throat," Eldridge promised. The words held zero emotion. The man swallowed hard. The sharp edge of the blade scraped his skin. He released his grip on the rifle. The weapon clattered against the rock. Eldridge maintained the chokehold. He dragged the man backward, pulling him deep into the shadow of a towering limestone slab. He threw the man to the dirt. The lookout scrambled, gasping for breath. He looked up at the drifter in the canvas coat. He recognized the man who had delivered 2 corpses to the saloon porch. Eldridge planted his boot squarely on the man's chest, pinning him to the earth. He pointed the knife at the man's right eye. "Name?" Eldridge demanded. "Decker," the man choked out. "You watch the back door, Decker." "Vasquez pays me to watch." "Vasquez pays you to die," Eldridge corrected. "He puts 10 men in the rocks to shoot a ghost. He puts a dummy in a chair." Decker's eyes widened. He realized the drifter knew the layout. "Where does the girl sit?" Eldridge asked. Decker sealed his lips. He shook his head. Eldridge leaned his weight into his boot, crushing the air out of Decker's lungs. He lowered the knife tip. He rested it against the soft flesh just below Decker's left eye. "Vasquez wears tailored suits," Eldridge said. "He appreciates the value of leverage." He leaves his leverage sitting in the dirt of a canyon. He risks his entire operation. A stray bullet kills the teacher. He loses his trade. He kept her. Decker squirmed. The knife tip tracked his movement, maintaining contact. I possess zero patience today, Eldridge said. I ask one final time. Where does she sit? Decker broke. The terror overrode his loyalty. The saloon. Decker gasped. The Silver Star. Back office. Eldridge absorbed the intelligence. It fit the profile. Vasquez controlled the saloon. He controlled the vault. He placed his bait in the safest room in his empire. He left us here to kill you, Decker confessed. He said you would ride in with the book. He built a cage and forgot to shut the door, Eldridge said. Eldridge reached down. He delivered a short, brutal punch to the side of Decker's jaw. Bone cracked. Decker's eyes rolled up. He went limp in the dirt. Eldridge checked the unconscious man. He retrieved Decker's rifle and hurled it over the edge of the ridge, letting it shatter on the rocks below. He turned his gaze back toward Ocotillo. The town baked in the afternoon sun, a collection of false fronts and corruption. The best rifleman in Vasquez's crew sat in a canyon, staring at a sack of flour. The boss sat in his saloon, holding the girl, waiting for a messenger who would never arrive. Eldridge sheathed his knife. He picked up his Springfield. The front door of the Silver Star presented a fortress. The canyon presented a decoy. Eldridge preferred the roof. He walked back to his horse. He planned a return trip to town. He intended to skip the toll and collect the principal. Chapter 14. Ocatillo baked under a relentless afternoon sun. The street below sat empty. The citizens hid behind locked doors, waiting for Hector Vasquez to return and declare a winner in the war. Eldridge Sample avoided the main thoroughfare. He navigated the bay horse through a maze of back alleys and garbage middens. He stopped behind the Ocotillo House Hotel. He dismounted. He tied the bay to a hitching ring bolted to the brick foundation. He loosened the cinch. He gave the animal a handful of oats from a feed bag. Eat, Eldridge commanded the horse. We run later. A rickety wooden staircase clung to the back exterior wall of the hotel, serving as a fire escape for the second floor. Eldridge climbed the steps. He tested each board before committing his weight. Dry rot plagued the wood. He reached the top landing. He hoisted himself onto the flat, tar paper roof. The heat hit him in a solid wave. The black tar absorbed the sun, radiating a suffocating warmth that smelled of melted pitch and ancient dust. He stayed low. He crouched below the parapet wall. He moved across the hotel roof, heading toward the adjacent building. The Silver Star Saloon stood next door. A 3-foot gap separated the structures. A sheer drop of 30 feet awaited a misstep. Eldridge gauged the distance. He holstered his Colt Peacemaker. He secured the leather thong over the hammer. He backed up 2 steps. He rushed forward. He leapt. He sailed across the open air. His boots struck the flat roof of the saloon. He bent his knees, absorbing the kinetic shock. He rolled onto his shoulder, silencing the impact. He lay flat against the hot tar paper, catching his breath. He listened for shouts from the street. 0 shouts erupted. The town remained dead. Eldridge stood up. He drew the heavy Bowie knife from his belt sheath. A square skylight protruded from the center of the saloon roof. Decades of alkali dust and pigeon droppings coated the thick glass panes, rendering them opaque. A rusted iron frame held the glass in place. Eldridge approached the structure. He used the flat side of his blade to scrape a viewing hole through the grime. He peered into the belly of the beast. The Silver Star sat devoid of its usual clientele. The faro tables stood bare. The chairs rested upside down on the green felt tabletops. Sunlight filtered through the front windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the stagnant air. Behind the long mahogany bar, Higgins wiped a whiskey glass with a clean white rag. The bartender possessed the nervous, twitchy energy of a trapped rabbit. Sweat beaded on his bald scalp. One guard occupied the main room. He sat at a table near the bottom of the grand staircase. He wore a dirty brown bowler hat and a canvas duster. He held a double-barreled shotgun across his thighs. He picked his teeth with a wooden matchstick. Eldridge recognized the layout. The skylight provided ventilation and light for the mezzanine. A brass chandelier hung suspended from a heavy iron crossbeam dead center in the open shaft. A wrought iron railing circled the second-floor balcony. The guard spat the matchstick onto the floorboards. Vasquez took the entire crew to the gorge, the guard complained. His voice drifted up through the ventilation gaps in the skylight. They get to shoot the drifter. They get the glory. I sit here, babysitting a cripple and a school teacher. Higgins kept wiping the same clean glass. Mr. Vasquez trusts you with the perimeter, Tully. He considers you a reliable man. He considers me a bench warmer, Tully grumbled. I want to burn powder today, Higgins. I feel a severe itch in my trigger finger. I suggest you scratch it on a beer mug, Higgins replied. Gunfire brings broken mirrors. I despise sweeping broken mirrors. The shards ruin my brooms. Tully laughed. A harsh, grating sound. On the roof, Eldridge wedged the tip of the Bowie knife under the wooden sill of the skylight frame. He applied leverage. He pressed his weight down on the handle. The dry wood groaned. Rusty nails shrieked as they gave way, protesting their removal. He worked the blade around the entire perimeter, popping the nails one by one. He lifted the frame. He slid the entire glass section onto the tar paper. A square of open air gaped before him. The smell of stale beer and old cigar smoke rushed up from the saloon below. Eldridge sheathed the knife. He swung his legs over the edge of the opening. He gripped the heavy iron crossbeam. He lowered his body into the shaft. He hung suspended 20 feet above the main floor. The brass chandelier dangled inches from his boots. He shifted his grip. He moved hand over hand along the iron beam, heading toward the mezzanine railing. His muscles strained against the dead weight. He reached the edge of the balcony. He released the iron. He dropped. His boots hit the carpeted floor of the second story. He bent his knees to cushion the landing. The floorboards creaked under his weight. A sharp, distinct pop in the quiet cavern. Below, Tully stopped laughing. He grabbed the shotgun. He stood up. He kicked his chair back. He brought the weapon to port arms. Higgins, Tully said. He aimed the twin barrels at the ceiling. You hear a noise upstairs? Higgins froze. He clutched the rag to his chest. He stared upward. Mice. The building contains enormous rats. They run in the walls. They knock things over. Rats wear heavy boots now? Tully asked. He thumbed the twin hammers back. The metallic clicks echoed off the stamped tin ceiling like cracking ice. Tully placed a foot on the bottom step of the grand staircase. He began his ascent, leading with the scattergun. Eldridge drew the Colt Peacemaker. He stepped out of the shadows. He walked to the wooden railing. He looked down at the man climbing the stairs. Drop the scattergun, Eldridge commanded. Tully froze. He looked up. He saw the drifter standing on the balcony. He recognized the dusty canvas coat. He recognized the flat, unblinking blue eyes. He saw the black bore of the Colt, pointing straight down at his face. Tully weighed his options. He worked for Hector Vasquez. Vasquez paid top dollar for loyalty. But Vasquez stood 10 miles away, in a rocky canyon, waiting for a ghost to step into a crossfire. The ghost stood right here, holding a royal flush. "You belong in the canyon," Tully stated. Confusion leaked into his voice. "I altered my itinerary," Eldridge replied. "Drop the iron. Or catch a heavy bullet in the teeth. You decide right now. I possess 0 patience." Tully looked at the shotgun in his hands. He looked at the long barrel of the peacemaker, tracking his face. The itch in his trigger finger vanished, replaced by a sudden, intense desire to continue breathing air. He opened his hands. The shotgun clattered against the wooden stairs. It bounced down the treads. It slid across the floor, coming to rest against the brass footrail of the bar. "Step away from it," Eldridge ordered. Tully backed up. He retreated to the center of the room. He kept his hands raised level with his ears. Eldridge vaulted over the railing. He dropped 12 feet. He landed in a perfect crouch on the main floor, absorbing the shock. He stood up. He kept the Colt aimed at Tully's chest. He approached the guard. He drew the heavy Bowie knife with his left hand. He reversed his grip, presenting the solid brass pommel. "Turn around," Eldridge directed. Tully turned around. He presented his back. Eldridge struck him hard behind the right ear. The blow connected with brutal precision. Tully collapsed. He folded into a heap on the floorboards, snoring before his face hit the dust. Eldridge sheathed the knife. He turned his attention to the bar. Higgins stood petrified behind the mahogany. The white rag fell from his trembling fingers. He raised both hands high in the air, stretching his arms toward the ceiling. "I offer 0 resistance," Higgins stammered. The sweat dripped into his eyes. "I pour drinks. I sweep floors. I hold 0 stake in this war. Please do not shoot the mirror." "Where is the girl?" Eldridge asked. "Back office," Higgins squeaked. He pointed a shaking finger down a dark hallway behind the stairs. "Dutch took her back there an hour ago." He locked the heavy door. "Dutch remains inside." "He waits," Higgins confirmed. "He paces the floor. He drinks rye whiskey straight from the bottle. His shattered arm causes him severe pain. He possesses a foul temper today. He talks about hanging her." "A foul temper makes a man careless," Eldridge said. "And a broken arm makes him slow." Eldridge walked toward the hallway. The passage stretched dark and narrow, ending at a solid oak door marked private. He stopped at the edge of the shadows. He listened. He heard a man cursing. A deep, raspy voice spitting venom at the walls. He heard the clink of a glass bottle against wood. He heard the heavy, uneven tread of a man pacing a confined space, dragging a set of silver spurs. Dutch held the hostage. Dutch held a grudge. Dutch waited behind the thick oak wood. Eldridge checked the cylinder of the peacemaker. 5 loaded chambers. He rested his thumb on the hammer. He stepped into the hallway. He aimed his boots at the door. The back door awaited its breach. Chapter 15. Eldridge Sample stood in the dark hallway of the Silver Star Saloon. He faced a solid oak door. A frosted glass pane in the upper half displayed the word private in reversed gold lettering. A sliver of yellow light bled from the gap between the floorboards and the door bottom. Beyond the wood, a man paced. Heavy boots struck the floor in a ragged, uneven rhythm. The scrape of silver spurs punctuated each step. A voice accompanied the pacing, thick with pain and rye whiskey. "You think he cares about you?" Dutch growled through the door. He holds zero interest in a school teacher. He wants the ledger. Vasquez holds the leverage. You provide the bait. Eldridge rested his right hand on the walnut grip of the Colt peacemaker. He assessed the geometry of the breach. The door opened inward. The hinges sat on the left. The lock plate sat on the right. He took a half step back. He raised his right boot. He drove his heel dead center into the brass lock plate. The impact sounded like a cannon shot in the confined hallway. The heavy oak splintered around the deadbolt. The door slammed inward, striking the interior plaster wall with a violent crash. The frosted glass shattered, raining jagged shards onto the carpet. Eldridge stepped through the frame. He brought the Colt up, leveling the barrel at eye height. The back office smelled of stale cigar smoke, spilled liquor, and fresh fear. A roll-top desk dominated the center of the room. Stacks of paper and an overturned ink bottle littered the surface. Black ink dripped onto the floor. Dutch stood behind the desk. The enforcer looked terrible. Sweat plastered his hair to his forehead. His face held a gray, sickly pallor. A dirty canvas sling immobilized his right arm against his chest. The broken wrist Eldridge had given him the night before continued to extract a toll. Dutch used his left arm to hold Abigail Trent. He possessed her in a brutal chokehold, his thick forearm wrapped around her throat. He dragged her backward, using her body as a meat shield. Abigail fought for breath. Her hands remained bound behind her back with rough hemp rope. Her dress bore dirt stains and a rip near the collar. She kept her eyes open, locking her gaze on Eldridge. She showed zero panic, only a rigid, furious endurance. Dutch held a short-barreled bulldog revolver in his left hand. He pressed the steel muzzle tight against Abigail's temple. The pressure dented her skin. Dutch stared at Eldridge. He stared at the long barrel of the peacemaker pointed at his face. "Drop it," Dutch roared. Panic elevated his voice to a shrill bark. "Drop the iron right now. I blow her brains all over the ledger books. I swear to God." Eldridge offered zero response. He kept his mouth shut. He kept his eyes flat. He locked his right elbow, establishing a solid shooting platform. Dutch retreated another step. He hit the back wall. The impact jostled his broken right arm. He let out a sharp hiss of pain. The distraction cost him a fraction of a second, but he tightened his grip on the revolver. "You hear me, Drifter?" Dutch screamed. Spit flew from his lips, catching the light from the kerosene lamp on the desk. "Vasquez has the canyon locked down. He brings 50 men. You hold zero chance. Put the gun on the floor." Eldridge took a step forward. He cleared the shattered door frame. His boots crunched on the broken glass. He read the target. Dutch utilized Abigail for cover, but the enforcer stood a head taller than the teacher. The upper half of Dutch's face remained exposed. The left eye, wide and frantic, presented a clear mark above Abigail's blonde hair. "I possess a hair trigger," Dutch warned. His left hand shook. The muzzle of the bulldog revolver tapped against Abigail's skull. "One flint, she dies. You want her blood on your boots." Eldridge took another step. He closed the distance to 12 feet. He ignored the threats. He ignored the sweat rolling down Dutch's face. He calculated the windage, the powder load, and the break of his own trigger. Dutch realized the stranger intended to shoot. He saw the absolute lack of mercy in the blue eyes. He recognized a predator that possessed zero interest in negotiation. Dutch tightened his finger on the trigger. He prepared to fire. Eldridge beat him to the break. Eldridge squeezed the trigger of the peacemaker. Boom! The roar of the .45 caliber cartridge filled the small office, a deafening concussion that rattled the framed maps on the walls. White smoke erupted from the muzzle, smelling of sulfur and burnt lead. The heavy slug crossed the room in a heartbeat. It struck Dutch dead center in the left eye. The kinetic shock snapped Dutch's head backward against the pine boards of the wall. The impact extinguished his life before his brain registered the noise. His left hand spasmed. The bulldog revolver fired a reflex shot into the ceiling, blowing a hole through the plaster. Dutch released his grip. His knees folded. He slid down the wall, a lifeless sack of dead weight, leaving a dark smear against the vertical planks. He hit the floorboards and remained motionless. Abigail stumbled forward, suddenly free of the chokehold. She gasped, pulling deep breaths of the smoke-filled air into her lungs. She fell to her knees, coughing. Eldridge kept the Colt raised. He stepped around the desk. He kicked the bulldog revolver away from Dutch's hand. He verified the kill. The single hole told the complete story. The enforcer required zero further attention. Eldridge holstered the peacemaker. He drew the heavy Bowie knife from the sheath on his belt. He knelt behind Abigail. "Hold still," Eldridge commanded. He slipped the razor-sharp steel between her wrists. He cut outward, slicing through the thick hemp rope in one smooth motion. The bindings fell away to the floor. Abigail brought her arms forward. She rubbed her raw wrists. She took a ragged breath and looked at the dead man slumped against the wall. "He threatened to hang me," Abigail stated. Her voice held a flat, numb quality. "He told me he planned to build a gallows behind the livery." "He canceled his construction plans," Eldridge said. He sheathed the knife. He offered her a hand. She accepted the grip. She stood up. She smoothed her torn dress. She looked at Eldridge. "You offered zero words," Abigail noted. "You stepped into the room, and you killed him." "Conversation wastes time," Eldridge replied. "He held a gun to your head. I removed the gun. The method required a heavy bullet." Abigail looked around the office. She saw the open safe in the corner, stripped of the ledger Eldridge had taken the night before. She saw the broken glass on the floor. "Hector Vasquez holds a trap for you," Abigail warned. "In the canyon." He pinned a note to the church door. "He demands the ledger." "I read the note," Eldridge said. "I skipped the meeting. Vasquez sits in the rocks, watching a flour sack wearing your hat." "He will return," she said, "when he realizes the deception. He brings his entire crew." "I count on it," Eldridge said. He walked to the back door of the office. He threw the heavy iron deadbolt. He pulled the door open. A narrow alleyway stretched behind the saloon, littered with empty crates and broken bottles. The alley led away from the main street, offering a direct path to the residential block. "The town hides behind locked doors," Eldridge told her. "The street remains empty. You take this alley. You head straight back to Reverend Miller's church. You go down into the cellar. You pull the doors shut, and you stay in the dark." Abigail stepped to the threshold. She looked out into the alley. She looked back at the drifter. "You intend to stay," Abigail realized. "You intend to fight him here." "He requires a refund," Eldridge said. "He charged me a visitor's tax. I planned to collect the principal. He employs 20 men, Mr. Sample. Professional killers. They shoot like amateurs," Eldridge said. "And they rely on a leader who assumes he controls the board. I plan to flip the table." Abigail studied his face. She saw the cold calculation. She saw a man who treated a gunfight like a geometry problem. She nodded. "Give him hell," Abigail said. She picked up her skirts. She stepped out into the night. She hurried down the alley, her boots making soft sounds against the dirt, fading into the shadows until she vanished completely. Eldridge shut the back door. He threw the deadbolt, locking it from the inside. He turned back to the room. He looked at Dutch. He looked at the shattered door leading to the hallway. He pulled the Colt peacemaker from his holster. He broke the cylinder open, ejected the spent brass casing, and slid a fresh cartridge into the chamber. He walked out of the office. He moved down the hallway, heading toward the main room of the Silver Star Saloon. He had cleared the back door. Now he needed to prepare the front parlor for the return of Hector Vasquez. Chapter 16. Eldridge Sample stepped through the batwing doors of the Silver Star Saloon. He left the dead enforcer in the back office. He left the bartender trembling behind the mahogany counter. He stepped onto the boardwalk and breathed the hot, stagnant air of the street. He required a new angle. Staying inside the saloon meant fighting on Vasquez's territory. It meant defending a building with multiple entrances and a ruined skylight. He looked across the main intersection. The assayer's office sat diagonally from the saloon. It featured a solid brick facade, heavy iron bars on the front windows, and a raised wooden porch. It provided a clear field of fire covering the entire center of Ocotillo. Eldridge stepped off the boardwalk. He crossed the dirt street in long, deliberate strides. He climbed the steps of the assayer's office. He grabbed the brass doorknob. He turned it. Locked. He drew the Colt peacemaker. He smashed the heavy steel barrel against the glass pane above the lock. The glass shattered, raining sharp fragments onto the porch. He reached through the jagged hole, found the interior deadbolt, and flipped the latch. He pushed the door open. He stepped inside. The office smelled of the sulfur and nitric acid he remembered from his previous visit. He moved to the front window. He took a heavy oak chair and smashed the remaining glass out of the frame, clearing the view and removing any chance of reflection. He pulled the chair into the shadows, 3 feet back from the sill. He sat down. He broke open the Colt. He ejected the spent brass casing from the round that killed Dutch. He slotted a fresh cartridge into the chamber. He snapped the cylinder shut. He rested the revolver on his thigh. He waited. 10 minutes passed. The town remained a ghost town. Shop doors stayed barred. Citizens hid behind drawn curtains. They knew the score. They knew the final tally required a body count. A vibration rippled through the floorboards. The rhythmic thud of multiple horses approaching from the north road. Dust preceded them, a brown cloud rolling down the center of the street. Hector Vasquez rode at the front of the column. He rode a sleek black gelding. He wore his tailored gray suit, coated now in a layer of canyon dirt. His face held the rigid, frozen expression of a man who had spent the entire day staring at a flour sack tied to a chair. 10 men rode behind him. They looked exhausted. They looked furious. They carried Winchester rifles across their saddle horns. They had baked in the rocks, expecting a ghost to ride into their crossfire. The ghost had declined the invitation. Vasquez pulled the black gelding to a halt in front of the Silver Star Saloon. The 10 riders fanned out behind him, their horses tossing their heads eager for water and shade. Vasquez looked at the saloon. He noticed the silence. He noticed the absence of his perimeter guard. He dismounted. He handed the reins to the nearest rider. "Keep the men mounted," Vasquez ordered. "Form a line." Vasquez climbed the boardwalk steps. He pushed the batwing doors open. He stepped into the cool dimness of his establishment. The piano sat silent. The faro tables stood empty. "Tully," Vasquez called out. Zero answer. Vasquez walked further into the room. He saw Tully. The guard lay crumpled near the base of the grand staircase, a swollen purple knot disfiguring the side of his head. Vasquez stopped. He looked at the bar. Higgins crouched behind the mahogany, his hands covering his ears, his face pressed against the floorboards. Higgins, Vasquez said. The tone held a cold, sharp edge. Higgins peeked over the top of the bar. He saw the boss. He scrambled to his feet, knocking over a bottle of rye. The liquor spilled across the polished wood, dripping onto the floor. He came through the roof, Mr. Vasquez, Higgins blabbered. The bartender pointed a shaking finger at the shattered skylight high above the mezzanine. He dropped like a spider. He hit Tully. He took my shotgun. Vasquez looked up at the broken glass framing the blue sky. He looked back at Higgins. Where's Dutch? Vasquez demanded. Back office, Higgins sobbed. He had the girl back there. The drifter went down the hall. I heard the door break. I heard one shot. The girl ran out the back alley. Vasquez turned away from the bar. He unbuttoned his suit jacket. He drew a silver-plated Smith & Wesson revolver from a shoulder holster. He walked down the narrow hallway. His boots crushed the shards of frosted glass scattered across the carpet. He reached the ruined oak door. He stepped into the private office. He saw the open, empty safe in the corner. He saw the spilled ink on his desk. He saw Dutch. The enforcer sat slumped against the pine wall, his legs splayed out in front of him. A single dark hole marked the center of his left eye. Blood stained the wallboards behind his head. The canvas sling holding his broken wrist hung limp. Vasquez stared at his top lieutenant. He evaluated the scene. A precision kill. Zero struggle. The drifter had breached a locked door and executed a hostage-taker before the man could flinch. Vasquez holstered his silver revolver. He realized the shift in power. He understood the mathematics of the street. He employed 10 gunmen outside. They held rifles. They held the numerical advantage. But the drifter held the ledger, the high ground of the town's psychology, and a proven capacity to dismantle a crew piece by piece. Hunting the man in the alleys meant losing more men. It meant losing the town's remaining shred of fear. A boss who chases shadows looks weak. A boss who makes deals looks pragmatic. Vasquez turned around. He walked out of the office. He walked down the hall, past the weeping bartender, and pushed through the batwing doors. He stepped out onto the edge of the boardwalk. His 10 riders sat their horses, watching him. They saw the tight set of his jaw. They gripped their rifles harder. Vasquez ignored them. He looked up and down the empty street. He looked at the false front buildings, the locked mercantile, the silent livery. He looked at the assayer's office across the intersection. He noticed the broken front window. He noticed the dark square of shadow behind the jagged glass. He squared his shoulders. He projected his voice. He used the tone he reserved for town council meetings and foreclosures. Sample, Vasquez yelled. The name echoed off the lumber and the brick. It rolled down the street and faded into the desert beyond. Eldridge sat in the oak chair behind the broken window. He rested the Colt on his knee. He listened to the echo. He offered zero response. I know you occupy the street, Vasquez shouted. I see your work. You ruined my door. You killed my foreman. Vasquez stepped down into the dirt. He stood in the sunlight, making himself a clear, visible target. He wanted to project absolute confidence. You play a dangerous game, cowboy, Vasquez called out. You stole my property. You stole my ledger. You think that gives you the town. It gives you a target on your back. A horse snorted in the line behind Vasquez. The rider shushed the animal. The silence returned, heavy and oppressive. But I recognize talent, Vasquez yelled. He pitched his voice toward the assayer's office, trusting his instinct. I recognize a man who understands leverage. You dismantled my crew. You proved your point. Vasquez spread his hands wide, palms open, showing empty fingers. You're a businessman, Sample, Vasquez roared. I respect a businessman. We hold a mutual problem. We require a mutual solution. Vasquez took 2 steps forward, putting himself dead center in the intersection. Let's do business, Vasquez offered. Step out into the light. Let's parley. Inside the assayer's office, Eldridge Sample thumbed the hammer of the peacemaker. The metallic click sounded loud in the confined room. He stood up from the oak chair. He stepped out of the shadows, moving toward the broken window and the ruined door. Hector Vasquez wanted to do business. Eldridge prepared to audit the final account. Chapter 17. Eldridge Sample pushed the shattered door of the assayer's office open. The ruined wood groaned against the bent hinges, scraping the floorboards. He stepped out onto the raised porch. He let his canvas coat fall open, ensuring the Colt peacemaker rested free and clear against his right thigh. Hector Vasquez stood dead center in the main intersection of Ocotillo. He held his position in the harsh afternoon sun. Dust coated his tailored gray suit, a souvenir from his useless ride to the canyon. He kept his hands open, palms facing the sky, projecting the image of a reasonable man arriving at a peace conference. Behind Vasquez, 10 riders sat their horses. They formed a ragged skirmish line across the width of the street. They held Winchester rifles across their saddle horns. They watched Eldridge. They awaited a signal from the boss. They looked exhausted, coated in trail grit, their faces tight with frustrated anger. Corbo sat near the center of the line, his eyes shifting nervously between the drifter on the porch and the dead silence of the town. You possess a genuine flair for the dramatic, Sample, Vasquez called out. His voice carried across the distance, smooth and practiced. It echoed off the false fronts of the locked buildings. You come into my town. You ruin my top enforcer. You steal my private ledger. You force me to ride out to a rock pile, to stare at a flour sack. You cost me a full day of commerce. You overcharge for the air, Eldridge replied. His voice remained flat, lacking any inflection. Vasquez chuckled. The sound held a dry, businesslike quality. It offered zero humor. I charge what the market bears, Vasquez said. He dropped his hands and hooked his thumbs into the pockets of his vest. Ocatillo requires order. Order requires funding. I provide the structure. The citizens provide the capital. We maintain an ecosystem here. You disrupted the ecosystem. You maintain a slaughterhouse, Eldridge observed. You just paint it white and call it a bank. Vasquez ignored the insult. He tilted his head, evaluating the man standing in the shadows of the porch awning. He analyzed the posture. He noted the relaxed shoulders and the hands resting near the gun belt. He recognized a professional. Dutch lacked vision, Vasquez stated. He spoke loud enough for his men to hear. He intended to establish a new narrative. Dutch operated with a hammer. A hammer breaks things. Broken things generate zero revenue. You demonstrated a superior intellect today. You dismantled my night crew with absolute precision. You executed Dutch without a drawn-out conversation. I respect efficiency. Eldridge rested his left hand on the porch rail. He studied the 10 riflemen. He calculated the distance. 60 feet. He calculated the drop angles and the cover provided by the rain barrels near the boardwalk. "I possess a proposition," Vasquez announced. "A settlement to end the current hostilities." "I listen," Eldridge said. Vasquez reached into the inside pocket of his gray suit jacket. He withdrew a thick stack of greenbacks. A heavy paper band bound the currency together. He held the money up in the sunlight. $5,000, Vasquez said. Cash. United States currency. Clean and ready to spend. Vasquez took 2 measured steps forward. The dust puffed around his polished boots. "I offer you an exit," Vasquez continued. "You take the 5,000. You walk down to the livery. You saddle your bay horse. You ride north. You keep the ledger. You throw it in a river. You burn it in a campfire. I care nothing for the physical book if you vacate the territory. We reset the board right here. You walk away a rich man." Eldridge looked at the stack of bills. $5,000 represented 5 years of hard wages for a top hand. It bought a herd of prime cattle in Montana. It bought a saloon with crystal chandeliers in Denver. It bought a profound amount of quiet. "You offer a bribe," Eldridge stated. "I offer severance pay," Vasquez countered. "Consider it a bonus for terminating an obsolete employee." Dutch proved unreliable and slow. "You removed him from the payroll. You saved me the trouble of firing him. The cash compensates you for your labor." "I hold the ledger," Eldridge said. "The ledger holds the names. The ledger documents the skim. Without the ledger, the town stops paying." "The town pays because I breathe," Vasquez said. He smiled. The smile resembled a razor slash across his face. "The book makes the collections neat. The book provides a schedule. But fear makes the collections possible. I will recreate the book. I will break a few fingers at the mercantile. I will shatter a window at the barber shop. The envelopes will resume by Friday. Ocotillo belongs to me. A missing book changes 0 facts on the ground." Eldridge remained silent. He let the words hang in the hot, stagnant air. Vasquez interpreted the silence as negotiation. Men who hesitated over money always held out for a better price. Vasquez understood the mechanics of greed. He believed the geometry of a payoff solved every human equation. Vasquez slid the money back into his pocket. He raised his hands again. He changed his pitch. He shifted the conversation from a payoff to a partnership. "Perhaps 5,000 falls short of your ambitions," Vasquez suggested. His tone turned conversational, inviting. "Perhaps a man of your caliber seeks a steady income. A permanent portfolio." Vasquez pointed a finger at the Silver Star Saloon down the block. Then he pointed at the stone facade of the bank. "You possess the exact skill set I require," Vasquez said. "You project authority. You execute tasks without hesitation. The men sitting on those horses behind me." Vasquez gestured over his shoulder. "They fear you. They consider you a ghost in a canvas coat. Fear constitutes a prime asset in my line of work." "You offer a job," Eldridge deduced. "I offer a franchise," Vasquez corrected. "I need a right hand. A man capable of managing the heavy lifting while I manage the politics and the banking. You replace Dutch. You take his salary. You take his premium room at the hotel. But you gain more than wages. You gain equity." Vasquez spread his arms wide, encompassing the entire dusty street of Ocotillo, claiming the lumber and the brick and the terrified people hiding behind the drawn curtains. "You take a Texas cut," Vasquez proclaimed. Eldridge tilted his head. He kept his eyes locked on the boss. "A Texas cut." "A percentage of the gross," Vasquez explained, his voice vibrating with salesman energy. "Not a flat wage. You take a piece of every envelope, handed across every bar in this town. You take a slice of the mercantile profits. You take a sliver of the assayer's gold dust. You become a full partner in the Ocotillo enterprise." Vasquez took another step closer. He stood 30 feet from the porch. The gap narrowed. "Look at the potential, Sample," Vasquez urged. "You ride the drift. You sleep in the dirt. You eat cold beans from a tin can. You live one stray bullet away from a shallow grave. I offer you a kingdom. We rule this valley together. We organize the collections. We expand the operation. We take the next town up the rail line. We dictate the terms to the cattle barons." The 10 men on the horses remained rigid. They listened to their boss offer the keys to the kingdom to the man who had just slaughtered their friends in the dark. They showed zero objection. Vasquez paid their wages. Vasquez did the thinking. They followed the money. "You hold the speed," Vasquez said, tapping his temple. "I hold the infrastructure. Together, we constitute an absolute monopoly. The town will bow to you. The merchants will tip their hats when you walk the planks. You will drink the best rye whiskey. You will sleep in silk sheets." Eldridge shifted his weight. He evaluated the offer. It presented a perfect, flawless logic from the perspective of a sociopath. Vasquez identified a superior predator. Vasquez sought to domesticate the predator with cash, comfort, and status. Vasquez assumed every man carried a price tag. "You make a compelling argument," Eldridge stated. Vasquez beamed. The tension in his shoulders evaporated. He believed he had closed the sale. He believed he had turned an enemy into a weapon he could wield. "I am a pragmatic man," Vasquez said. He reached out an empty hand, offering a shake across the distance. "I recognize supreme value." We shake hands. We go inside the Silver Star. We drink a glass of Kentucky bourbon. We celebrate the new arrangement. Eldridge stepped off the porch. He descended the 3 wooden stairs with a slow, deliberate pace. His boots crunched on the gravel. He walked out into the street, closing the distance to 20 feet. He stood in the raw sunlight. He felt the heat bake through his canvas coat. He looked at the tailored gray suit. He looked at the silver conchos flashing on Vasquez's hatband. "You outline a profitable future," Eldridge said. "A glorious future," Vasquez agreed. "A Texas cut makes a man a king." Eldridge reached into the deep inside pocket of his canvas coat with his left hand. He pulled out the thick, black leather-bound ledger. The book that cataloged every dime of misery Hector Vasquez had squeezed from the dry earth of Ocatillo. Vasquez's eyes locked onto the book. Pure hunger flared in his expression. The return of his leverage. The return of his absolute control over the ledgers and the lives of the town. Eldridge held the ledger up. He showed it to the boss. He showed it to the 10 men sitting on their tired horses. "You possess one fatal flaw in your calculation," Eldridge said. Vasquez frowned. The smile vanished. "Name it." "You assume we share the same currency," Eldridge said. Chapter 18. "You assume we share the same currency," Eldridge Sample said. He stood on the bottom step of the assayer's office porch. He held the black leather ledger in his left hand. His right hand hung relaxed, brushing the canvas fabric of his coat near the walnut grips of the Colt peacemaker. Hector Vasquez lost his salesman's smile. The smooth, practiced veneer cracked, revealing the cold, calculating predator beneath. He studied the drifter. He studied the book. Gold maintains a universal translation, Vasquez stated. He kept his hands visible, palms facing the clear blue sky. Men fight for it. Men die for it. A percentage of this town represents absolute security. It represents a life free from the trail. Your gold carries a stench, Eldridge said. It smells of intimidation. It smells of dead men in narrow canyons. It smells of school teachers dragged out of cellars. It smells of order, Vasquez countered. Ocotillo requires a firm hand. Ocatillo requires a gravedigger, Eldridge said. And business looks booming. Eldridge stepped off the wooden porch. His boots hit the dirt street. He closed the distance. He took measured, deliberate strides. He did not rush. He moved with the inevitable rhythm of a pendulum. The 10 riders behind Vasquez shifted in their saddles. The leather creaked. Winchesters scraped against denim. Corbeau, sitting near the center of the skirmish line, swallowed hard. His horse tossed its head, sensing the sudden spike in human tension. Vasquez stood his ground. He possessed pride. Retreating in front of his entire crew constituted a fatal show of weakness. He let Eldridge approach. Eldridge stopped 12 feet away. He established the kill zone. At 12 feet, a man with a pistol could beat a man with a rifle if the pistol man moved first. Eldridge always moved first. He lifted the black ledger. He held it between them. You built an empire on these pages, Eldridge said. You recorded every dime of misery. You used this paper to turn free men into serfs. I built a system, Vasquez said. The vein in his neck throbbed against his pristine white collar. I built an enterprise. Eldridge opened his left hand. He dropped the book. The heavy ledger fell. It hit the alkali dust with a flat, muffled slap. A small cloud of white powder puffed into the air, coating the black leather. Vasquez stared at the book in the dirt. He looked at it like Eldridge had just dropped a newborn child. You discard your own leverage, Vasquez whispered. You throw away the keys to the kingdom. I discard trash, Eldridge said. I possess zero interest in your kingdom. I decline the job offer. I decline the $5,000. I reject the Texas cut. Vasquez tore his eyes away from the ledger. He met Eldridge's gaze. He searched for a bluff. He found blank blue flint. You negotiate poor terms, Vasquez said. His voice dropped an octave, scraping the bottom of his throat. You stand in the open street. 10 men hold rifles trained on your chest. You drop your shield. You leave yourself 0 options. I hold the best option, Eldridge said. Which is? I hold you, Eldridge said. He took a half step to the right, adjusting his angle. He squared his shoulders to the boss. He ignored the 10 men on the horses. He rendered them invisible. He made the universe shrink until it contained only 2 men and the space between them. You offer a piece of the pie, Eldridge said. I despise pie. I want the baker. Vasquez narrowed his eyes. You want me. I want the man who sent 4 amateurs to ruin a good felt hat, Eldridge said. I want the man who beats old men and threatens women. The men behind you follow a paycheck. You write the checks. I remove the pen, the ink dries up. Corbeau leaned forward in his saddle. Boss, give the word. We cut him to ribbons. Vasquez raised his right hand. A sharp, chopping motion. Hold your fire, Vasquez commanded. He kept his eyes locked on Eldridge. He wants to play a different game. I play the only game left, Eldridge said. You think you can beat 10 rifles? Vasquez asked. I possess zero interest in the rifles, Eldridge explained. His tone carried the calm instruction of a schoolmaster teaching arithmetic. I focus on the boss. The men on the horses require a second to react. They require a second to aim. I require less than a second to draw. I pull the Colt. I place 2 rounds in your chest before the first rifle fires. They kill me. But you die first. The math remains absolute. Vasquez felt the truth of the statement. He felt the cold touch of mortality brush against his spine. The gray suit offered zero armor. The silver conchos on his hat provided zero deflection. The drifter did not care about survival. The drifter cared about the sequence of events. You are a madman, Vasquez stated. I am an auditor, Eldridge corrected. And the account shows a heavy deficit. Vasquez let his right hand drift toward the lapel of his coat. He favored a shoulder holster. He favored a silver-plated Smith & Wesson. He trusted his speed. He had killed men in Sonora. He had killed men in Dodge. He considered himself a professional. You refuse the money, Vasquez said, summarizing the situation. You refuse the partnership. You drop the book. Correct. So we reach the end of commerce. We reach the counter-offer, Eldridge said. He relaxed his right hand. He hovered his fingers inches from the peacemaker. He felt the sun beating down on his shoulders. He felt the grit of the dirt under his boot soles. He narrowed his focus to the slight twitch in Vasquez's right shoulder, the telltale sign of a muscle preparing to contract. My counteroffer, Eldridge said, his voice ringing clear down the silent length of the Ocotillo Main Street, is you draw. And we see who goes to hell first. The 10 men on the horses held their breath. The citizens peering through the cracks in the mercantile shutters stopped blinking. Hector Vasquez stood frozen in the dust. The sophisticated businessman vanished. The predator took full control. The slate-gray eyes turned flat and dead. He recognized the challenge. He recognized the absolute necessity of meeting it. A boss who backed down from a single man in front of his crew ceased to remain a boss. Vasquez shifted his weight to the balls of his feet. He dropped his chin. He prepared to answer the offer. Chapter 19. 12 feet of crushed alkali and horse manure separated the drifter and the boss. Hector Vasquez considered the mathematics of the street. He favored stacked decks. He preferred a scattergun in a blind alley or a hired rifle positioned on a high ridge. A fair draw in the open sun offered unacceptable variables. But the drifter had stripped the variables away. He had dropped the ledger in the dirt. He had insulted the king in front of his entire court. You force a stupid play, Vasquez said. Eldridge Sample maintained his focus on the center of the gray suit jacket. He ignored the eyes. Eyes lie. Shoulders tell the absolute truth. A man pulling iron from a shoulder rig must dip his opposite shoulder to clear the leather. Eldridge waited for the dip. I offer a conclusion, Eldridge replied. You throw your life away over a hat, Vasquez scoffed. A piece of felt. A good hat requires years to shape, Eldridge said. It represents an investment. You ruined the investment. Behind Vasquez, the 10 mounted men held their collective breath. Corbo gripped his Winchester. He watched his boss. He waited for a hand signal. He waited for a command to open fire and cut the drifter down. Vasquez offered 0 signals. Pride anchored his boots to the earth. A leader who ordered his men to fight a single challenger forfeited his leadership. He needed to prove his dominance. He needed to put the ghost in the ground with his own hands. Vasquez made his decision. He dropped his left shoulder. His right hand darted inside the lapel of the tailored gray jacket. His fingers closed around the pearl grips of the silver-plated Smith & Wesson. Eldridge moved. He executed the draw without rush. Smooth motion creates fast motion. His right hand swept up, clearing the heavy cold peacemaker from the low-slung holster. His thumb caught the hammer spur, pulling it back in a single fluid arc. The cylinder rotated, locking a heavy brass cartridge in line with the steel barrel. Vasquez cleared his shoulder holster. The silver barrel swung out, leveling toward Eldridge's chest. Eldridge fired. Boom! The heavy .45 caliber slug struck Vasquez dead center in the sternum. The kinetic impact halted the boss's forward momentum. It threw his aim high. Vasquez pulled his trigger a fraction of a second later. Bang! The bullet from the Smith & Wesson punched a hole through the wooden awning of the assayer's office, showering Eldridge with pine splinters. Eldridge absorbed the shower of wood. He did not flinch. He thumbed the hammer again. He fired a second time. Boom! The second bullet caught Vasquez 2 inches below the first. It shattered his ribs. It destroyed the engine room. Vasquez dropped his silver gun. The pristine weapon hit the dirt with a dull thud. The boss followed it. He collapsed straight down, his knees folding under his weight. The tailored gray suit hit the dust, raising a small cloud of white powder. He rolled onto his back. He stared at the blinding white sky. He ceased breathing. The echo of the 3 shots bounded off the false front buildings, rolling down the length of the street and fading into the open plains beyond the town limits. Eldridge shifted his stance. He pointed the smoking barrel of the Colt at Corbo. The 10 men on horseback sat frozen. They stared at their dead boss. The man who signed their paychecks lay bleeding in the dirt. The man who did their thinking lay silent. The source of their power evaporated in the span of 2 heartbeats. The contract expired, Eldridge announced. Corbo looked at the dead man. He looked at the heavy black ledger resting undisturbed in the dust. He looked at the drifter holding the Colt, noting the absolute lack of hesitation in the man's posture. Corbo lowered his Winchester. He rested it across his saddle horn. "I possess 0 interest in this town," Corbo stated. He yanked his reins. He drove his silver spurs into his horse's flanks. He turned the animal and rode hard for the North Trail, seeking the open country. The remaining 9 men evaluated the situation. They reached the identical conclusion. They abandoned the skirmish line. They spurred their tired mounts, kicking up a massive chaotic cloud of dirt. They fled Ocotillo as fast as the horses could carry them, a disorganized stampede of mercenaries seeking a new employer. The thunder of retreating hooves faded. The dust began to settle. Eldridge lowered the hammer of the peacemaker. He broke the cylinder open. He ejected the 2 spent brass casings. They hit the dirt near the ledger, hot and smoking. He slid 2 fresh rounds into the chambers. He snapped the gun shut and returned it to the leather on his hip. He walked out into the center of the street. He stopped next to the body of Hector Vasquez. He looked down at the ruined gray suit. He looked at the silver conchos on the hatband. Eldridge reached down and picked up the black leather ledger. He dusted the cover off against his canvas coat. He held the book in his left hand. The silence of the town shattered. The heavy lock on the front door of the mercantile clicked open. The door swung inward. Elias Stanton stepped onto his porch. He carried his Winchester, but he held it barrel down. Across the street, the barber emerged from his shop holding a straight razor. The blacksmith stepped out of his forge, gripping a heavy iron hammer. Doors opened all the way down the block. The citizens of Ocotillo stepped out into the sunlight. They moved with caution. They looked at the dead boss in the street. They looked at the fleeing dust cloud on the north horizon. They looked at the man in the canvas coat holding the book. Eldridge turned his back on the corpse. He walked toward the assayer's office, intending to finish the job he started. Chapter 20. The echo of the gunfire faded, absorbed by the vast expanse of the Texas plains. Dust settled over the tailored gray suit. Hector Vasquez stared at the blinding white sky with dead, unblinking eyes. Blood pooled beneath his ruined chest, turning the dry alkali earth into dark, sticky mud. The street maintained a heavy silence. Elias Stanton stepped off the mercantile porch. He held his Winchester rifle, but he directed the barrel at the dirt. The blacksmith emerged from the shadows of his forge, carrying his heavy iron hammer. The barber joined them. The desk clerk from the Ocatillo house pushed through the etched glass doors. Townspeople materialized from the alleys and the storefronts. They stepped into the raw sunlight. They formed a loose, cautious circle around the fallen boss. Men who had lived under the boot stepped out to look at the man who wore it. Eldridge Sample ignored the gathering crowd. He walked away from the body. He climbed the wooden steps to the Silver Star Saloon. He pushed the batwing doors inward. The barroom stood empty. Higgins had fled. The faro tables sat abandoned. Eldridge walked the length of the polished mahogany counter. He navigated the dark hallway behind the grand staircase. He entered the private back office. Dutch remained slumped against the pine boards. A bluebottle fly walked across the enforcer's sightless left eye. The air in the room tasted of copper and burnt powder. Eldridge stepped over the dead man's legs. A heavy iron Mosler safe sat bolted to the wall behind the roll-top desk. Vasquez trusted the bank for his legitimate business. He kept his extortion capital close. Eldridge lacked the time for delicate tumbler manipulation. He drew the Colt Peacemaker. He placed the heavy steel muzzle flush against the center of the brass dial. He averted his face. He squeezed the trigger. The .45 caliber slug shattered the internal mechanism with a deafening roar. The brass dial sheared off its spindle. It struck the far wall with a sharp ping. Eldridge kicked the heavy iron door with the heel of his boot. The hinges protested. The door swung wide. Eldridge reached inside the dark cavity. He bypassed a stack of silver bars. He grabbed a fat canvas sack resting on the bottom shelf. The fabric strained against the weight of minted gold eagles and banded greenbacks. The physical weight of Ocotillo's fear. He hoisted the sack over his right shoulder. He retraced his path down the hall. He exited the saloon. The crowd in the street numbered 50 souls now. They stared at the corpse in the dust. They looked up when Eldridge appeared on the porch. The citizens parted. They created a wide path through the dirt, giving the man in the canvas coat an absolute berth. Eldridge descended the stairs. He approached a man standing near the front of the circle. Mayor Caldwell. Caldwell wore a black frock coat and a nervous sweat that beaded on his forehead. Eldridge stopped in front of the mayor. He dropped the canvas sack. It struck the ground with a heavy, metallic clink. The top fell open, revealing the stacks of green paper and the glint of gold coin. Eldridge reached inside his coat. He withdrew the black leather ledger. He pressed the book flat against the mayor's chest. Caldwell fumbled with the leather cover. He grasped the book with trembling hands. "Give it back to the names in the book," Eldridge commanded. "Calculate the change." Caldwell looked at the ledger. He looked at the sack of gold. He looked at the dead man lying 10 feet away. He owned the bank, Caldwell stammered. He owned the town council. He owns a patch of dirt now, Eldridge replied. The rest belongs to the people who earned it. Eldridge turned his back on the mayor. He searched the perimeter of the crowd. He found Abigail Trent. She stood near the corner of the assayer's office. She wore a plain blue dress. She held her chin high. She looked at the dead boss in the street. She looked at the drifter who had burned the empire down to the bedrock. Eldridge met her gaze. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his dusty hat. A gesture of respect. She nodded. They shared a silent understanding of a debt settled and a ledger closed forever. Eldridge walked to his bay horse. The animal waited near the hitching post, ignorant of the shifting power dynamics of the human world. Eldridge unlooped the leather reins. He checked the cinch one last time. He swung his weight into the western saddle. He settled his boots in the stirrups. He pointed the horse north. He applied a gentle pressure with his knees. The bay stepped out. They rode down the center line of the main street. The townspeople watched him go. Nobody offered a cheer. Nobody shouted a threat. They stood in the absolute silence of their reclaimed town, absorbing the shock of their sudden freedom. Eldridge passed the town limits sign. The false fronts of Ocotillo faded behind him. The air lost the scent of fear and cheap lumber. The smell of sagebrush and open plains filled his lungs. He let the horse find a steady, ground-eating trot. He focused on the high country ahead. He considered the cold mountain streams waiting in the distance. He left the dust, the blood, and the ledgers to the people of the valley. The end.